Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to the 26th meeting of the Constitution Europe External Affairs and Culture Committee in 2025. We've received apologies from George Adam, and Alistair Allen is attending in his place this morning. We are also joined by colleagues Jackie Dunbar, Kevin Stewart and Audrey Nicholl. Our first agenda item this morning is to take evidence in relation to STV's proposals to news changes. Before they begin, I would like to declare an interest, as I am a member of the National Union of Journalists. I would also like to note that the briefing paper from SPICE for this morning's evidence session was amended and republished yesterday. We are joined in the room today by Nick McGowan-Lowe, National Organiser for Scotland for the NUJ, and Paul McManus, Negotiations Officer for BEC2. A warm welcome to you both this morning. We're going to go straight to questions. If I could begin with a question to Mr McManus. In your submission, you say that the idea that STV would so easily abandon its commitments to the cultural diversity and regional identity of the people of the north of Scotland is abhorrent to all our members, and indeed we believe it will be to the wider public. Can you expand on that and what representations you've had with regards to that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's central to the concept of the two licences. Each of the licences in the Central Belt and the north of Scotland represent the views and the cultural diversity of the people within those licence areas. And it's important to the people who live within those distinct areas that the programmes tell their stories and are made by people who live in those areas. People in Aberdeen, one of the things I've learned over 30 years of doing this job and spending a lot of time in Aberdeen in the north of Scotland is people in the north of Scotland don't like people from the Central Belt telling them what they should do or think, any more than people in the Central Belt like to think that London should be allowed to tell it what to do or think. So, and despite having served our members in the north of Scotland for over 30 years, I still would not presume to know what their cultural beliefs are, what their preferences are. We have to defer to them and their beliefs and tell their stories told by themselves. And that's why I believe that, just because technology allows us to deliver a programme from Glasgow, that doesn't mean to say it's to the benefit of the people. So I think, equally important in that is the loss of skills. That in itself, although STV are quick to tell us Ofcom, that's not a matter for Ofcom, if you take away those technical skills and programme making skills from Aberdeen, they're gone. You're not getting them back. And what you're also doing is cutting off an industry to a whole generation of new entrants. The vast majority of people working in the industry are freelance. They start their careers in their local areas and they then develop the networks as they grow and become more experienced. To move programme making away from Aberdeen, they're being denied those opportunities to get into the industry.
Thank you. If I could turn to Mr McGowan-Lowe, I think in your submission you described this as an act of cultural vandalism. I wonder if you could also say how you expect this to impact the cultural aspect in Aberdeen, given that we are the Culture Committee of the Parliament.
Thank you very much, Convener, and thank you for the invitation to this committee to speak. It is an act of cultural vandalism in this. The NUJ has a role as a trade union to protect the interests and livelihoods of its members, but we also take an absolutely acute interest in journalism generally, making sure there is a framework of journalism that exists around the country, that there are economic models which support that, and so on. And we've taken a lead on that over the last 5 years through our news recovery plan coming out of the pandemic. It is for viewers in the North East and Angus. They will suffer as a result of this. They will not get the local news that is there. They will not get their STV is prided itself on having that local connections, having that local news, and being able to deliver it. And it also delivers it to a number of disadvantaged groups and a number of specific groups, including the elderly, who are perhaps not going to switch to digital, they're not going to switch to online quite as there, but they are there watching the programme every night, as I did with my mother last night, who watches it avidly, and she lives just outside Dundee, and she would be hit by that as well. It's also not going to be good for viewers in Glasgow who are going to find that their local issues are going to be diluted. The ones in Edinburgh, if the drop-in if the 5-minute Edinburgh-specific cut-in is dropped. It's not going to be good for business leaders. It's not going to be good for journalism in Scotland either.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move to questions from the committee. A number of members are already indicated if people could put their hand up if they want to come in. I'll go to Mr Brown first.
Convener, I should say to the witnesses that we've recently had the BBC in here for their decision to cut back at River City, and the same issue of the loss of the back office jobs and skills was an issue raised then. I just wonder, in relation to the 10-year licence, which was only applied for last year, only started this year, so within the same year that they've pitched for this licence, they want to make these radical changes and cuts. I'm just wondering, do you think there's some bad faith going on here, such that they applied for the licence knowing they weren't going to see through its terms, but that by getting a licence, if you like, fended off competition, and now they've moved forward to make these cuts? Do you think that's what's going on here, or not?
I'm sensing a change in STV. Again, having been around, for since 2007, when STV was expected to go to ITV at any point then, STV has been on a fairly stable path. They have focused on quality programme making and improving their digital media output, and consistently turned over £20 million a year net profit. Without taking any huge risks, without making any big gambles, and they've been, the staff have consistently delivered those profits. Through numerous discussions late last year, STV said they expected a tough year. No big sporting events. It was going to be a tough, flat year, and then hopefully it would pick up next year with things like the World Cup coming along. So it seemed to us that STV had a plan set out going forward, and now all of a sudden to turn round on 1.5 year's dip, all of a sudden we've got to ditch our commitments to the licence fee and make a number of other changes, none of which make sense to us. I just find it difficult to believe that STV have been caught this unawares when the past 2 or 3 years this industry has been debated to death about the downturn on commissioning and the position with advertising. So, I'd perhaps phrase it the other way. They made the commitment late last year and early this year to the 2 licences, and I don't believe they should now be allowed to absolve themselves of those commitments.
Thank you. I can add to that. I echo what Paul has said there. But I will say this, that the licences were, I think, announced as agreed in March 2024. In the run-up to that, I think there was at least 2 years of negotiation of that. That was 2 years in which any of the arguments that they're advancing could have been flagged up. You're absolutely correct in that. So one of 2 things has happened. First of all, there is clearly a debate to be had about the changing nature of news consumption, and it's a debate that is not just happening in broadcast, it's happening in print, it's happening in other areas of journalism, and the way that organisations adapt to how people sort of absorb news. Separate to that, though, we have STV, and Paul is absolutely right. This is a short-term decision that is going to have absolutely catastrophic long-term effects if it is allowed to happen. And in those 2 years, I did not hear STV advance the argument before negotiating the licence, before agreeing the licence, of what they're attempting to do. But now they are there, now they're over the line, now presumably it's out of the cycle where other people can come in and take over the licence if needs be. They're doing so. And we need to be clear why they are doing so. STV's income, for the purposes of this, you can imagine it comes from sort of TV advertising, and it comes from the income from the production house. And TV advertising can alter significantly quarter by quarter. It's quite difficult to see in advance, although you can predict that last year they had the Euros and they had a good year. Next year they got the World Cup. We can assume that advertising will pick up on the back of that. This year we're below that, and that's not gone. But who knows? We could go into the budget, consumer confidence could come back, and that advertising could be restored. There's also the productions, but those are seen on a much longer timescale, that sort of around 18 months. You sort of know when you have a shortfall of productions coming through way in advance. So what had happened in May, there was the sort of launch of a new strategic direction. There was then the profits warning, which in the end of July, and a quite catastrophic drop in share price. I believe it dropped about a third of its value within a day. It has not recovered. It has not recovered even after STV has announced the latest set of plans at the end of September. So do I believe that they went into the licence with, making the same arguments about public sector broadcasting? That is possible. It's changing. But certainly now we are over the line. This seems to be rushed through, panicked, and it seems to be done under the basis of the Ofcom review, but it's quite separate for that. What I think this is to do with is financial mismanagement and not seeing this coming.
Yeah, Ofcom have been pointing out these trends for a decade in writing in the reports, so this can't have been something that caught STV by surprise. They also committed to substantial investment in both the Glasgow and Aberdeen facilities, which I'm just wondering how you can go from that, I come back to the point of whether they have negotiated the licence in bad faith, because that cordons it off from any other people coming in and bidding for it. They get that, and then as soon as they've done it, you suddenly reveal a few months later these dramatic changes, these huge cuts that have been talked about. In relation to the job losses and the output loss from the North East, does it seem to you like this is the USP that they have? Because nobody else provides what STV provide in the north east of Scotland, in the north of Scotland. And if they get rid of that, there's no one else providing it. So they're giving up, which seems in a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to a share price drop, the USP they've got. Are there not other areas that you're aware of that they could look to try and make sure they get through this process rather than cutting these jobs and their USP of the regionalised reporting that they do?
I think, from my perspective, the proposal around the North East, if you're saying we need to save money, if you set the argument they need to save money, for an independent broadcaster with the two licences, the starting point for me would not have been, well, let's just get rid of the programme in Aberdeen. That's got huge cultural and political implications for them. That's not a financial decision. That's a political decision. Equally, if they wanted to save money and they were aware of the difficulties that were coming ahead of them, then why spend over £1 million on bonuses for two senior executives earlier this year, one of who's no longer there? More recently, why spend £1.5 million on new sets for news programmes? Or, even more recently, why take a punt of £500,000 on a radio station that we've got no experience of running and going into an overcrowded market because we think it's going to make us some more advertising money? These are not rational decisions, and to my mind, that make sense. But equally, the negotiations about the licence fee took place before the current chief executive was in post, if my ageing memory serves me correctly. Nick will correct me if I'm wrong. But so there's been a change of chief executive through the period of negotiating the renewal of the licence and what we're seeing now in terms of proposals, which is why, as I say, I kind of feel that there's as much a change in direction here as a reaction to, the markets. Because at the end of the day, I don't think for half-yearly profits, the half-yearly results were, they're not catastrophic, and the company expects to be profitable by the end of the year. So the scale of what they're proposing to me is not just about saving money to prop up the share price.
I agree with what Paul has said. I will add some points as well. I would be interested to know what options STV considered before it came to the idea of axing the North programme. That was described to me by sort of a very well-placed member within STV as the nuclear option. What was considered before then? What mitigating circumstances were put into play? What other things were considered? And fundamentally, where is there a plan? Paul and I are experienced in going into businesses who want to reorganise, they want to have collective consultation. And what happens in those things, we are told on day one, this is the plan of what's going to happen. The only plan we've got so far is they want to cut the programme. They don't have a plan if Ofcom don't approve that. And that, to me, and Paul and I have both made the argument, we cannot meaningfully engage with the company until we know what we're doing. To give a parallel example, currently at Reach, as you'll know, they're cutting a great deal of jobs, particularly around local journalism. They came to us on day one and said, this is where we're doing it, these are the jobs we're going to cut, and this is the process we're going to follow, and this is what it's going to look like afterwards. They had a plan. It is a terrible plan, but it is a plan that we can argue about, and it gave people an insight into what the company would look like afterwards. But we've had nothing like that from STV. Instead, what we have done, as Paul says, they have been investing into the Aberdeen news set up until very recently. I understand in the last few weeks there was a piece of equipment worth £30,000 that was still arriving. This does not give the impression of a company who is thinking long term. They're doing a knee-jerk reaction, and what they are proposing is going to have a catastrophic effect on local democracy and the culture of the North East if it is allowed to go through. And what I will say, that if this company, when this company returns to profitability, if it has been allowed to do that, the cuts that it has done in news, it will not restore those. It will take that money, it'll give it to shareholders, it'll give it to executives, and so on. But we will not see, in a good year, the company coming back and saying, yes, we want to spend more money on that there, over and above our licence commitments, which is why it cannot go ahead.
Last question.
Very quickly, Mr.
I hope somebody else will cover the digital exclusion angle. But just thinking back, you mentioned in your evidence about the European Championships last year and the World Cup. And of course, I'm going to the match tonight. If Scotland were to win that, if they're to qualify, you can imagine the viewing figures going right up. And it'd be interesting to know what the difference in reporting was in Aberdeen from the Central Belt and Aberdeen's victory in the Scottish Cup last year. You wouldn't get that distinctive coverage. Do you think the possibility is that they could generate very substantially more income in the next year for these reasons or other reasons? And it's not just a change of direction, it's a U-turn they've done, and they're going to have to U-turn again, and it's not the sign of a stable board that's taken the longer-term view in relation to this.
I think from my perspective, again, looking at the history of the company, year in, year out, for the past 15, 18 years, £20 million a year profit, there surely has to be resilience planning in there to say, well, because of the volatility of advertising and depending on sporting events, etc., we have to build in some resilience to get us through the tougher years. And earlier this year, as I said earlier, we're assuming this is going to be a tough year, and next year will pick up because of the points you're making, because of the interest in the World Cup, particularly if Scotland qualify. STV, I would assume, if Scotland qualify, they will want to put extra output in place to get a share of that. Again, none of this makes sense against the background that next year they're going to be profitable this year, and next year things should pick up across the board.
I'll pick up on one point there, which is the volatility of advertising, which is going to be connected to it. The company is attempting to sort of diversify, but there is a common link to where it is diversifying. Productions coming through come from, that is in itself linked to TV advertising for other broadcasters who then commission productions from there. The investment in this radio station, which is still going ahead, and I have not seen a single note to say that anything that's the company has not rethought its strategy in that. It is, I think Paul mentioned 500,000. I think the figure I've heard is 1 million, but the company has not been public on how much it is spending there. It is not part of their licence commitments. It is not something that they need to do. It is, you could make the argument, I think it's impossible not to make the argument, that the company cannot afford to do that at this stage. And it is not going to be it's not going to be news-led. It's going to have maybe a 1-minute drop-in bulletin. It is going to be aimed at an audience which is completely different to 35 to 45, completely different to the audience in the North East who traditionally watch the news at 6. And they are ploughing ahead with that plan. And again, the income from that is completely unproven and based on advertising as well. They're just simply saying it's advertising, but at a different point in the day. Now, in order to fund that, which I would argue at the moment seems very frivolous given the money they have, they're looking to cut the money they spend on their licence commitments, their licence obligations that they entered into just 10 months ago. It is the equivalent, I would argue, of buying a sports car and then trying to pay less on the mortgage to afford it. You know, fundamentally, the radio station, I am astonished they have not reviewed their plans of going ahead with that and protected the public service broadcasting provisions that they have agreed to, they have committed to, and they have committed to for a 10-year period.
Okay, thank you. Mr Halker-Johnson.
Thanks. Morning to the panel. I mean, we've talked a lot about the Aberdeen and the North East, which is kind of understandable, but obviously this impacts on the Highlands and Islands as well, and some of the coverage that we have. And we've touched upon, Keith touched upon issues like Aberdeen, but obviously there are football clubs in my region too, and there's the Shinty, and there's Gaelic, and there's North Heritage with Up Heliar, and all of that will be impacted by that, and it seems to be kind of accepted. I just wanted to make that point, but what I was really kind of interested in, I suppose, do you know how staff were advised of these cuts? Because I've heard different reports.
My understanding is that they have what they call staff town halls, where all staff were either in person or online were briefed on the proposals. Nick and I were given an outline of the proposals the night before, and then either the Wednesday morning or the Thursday morning, STV briefed all staff in person or online about the proposals, and then it's subsequently been followed up with various documentation to advise them of what's happening. But as Nick has said earlier, I think a lot of the frustration for the staff was because there's, other than we're going to, close down Aberdeen and cut 60 jobs across the company, there's been very little other detail for staff to kind of get their heads around, because so much of it depends on what Ofcom decides.
And I mean, these online, those who are online would maybe be those based in kind of remote,
yes,
more remote areas. Okay, so there wasn't, there was an in-person, there was an in-person announcement as well, as your understanding.
I couldn't honestly tell you who was briefed in person, who was briefed, okay, online. I was simply told that they used both means to communicate to everybody at the same time.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
I'll come in on that. To echo what Paul has said, yes, there was a town hall. Yes, it was led by Rufus Radcliffe. The way he presented this did not. I mean, there is no good way to deliver announcements of restructures and redundancies. There are plenty of bad ones, and I think this classifies among it. The manner of his delivery, he was obviously reading from a script. There was a senior manager who joined from on holiday. There was another senior manager who joined from what appeared to be a hotel room that we believe was very close to a newsroom, so they could have gone in, they could have talked to staff in person. These are questions I can't answer. Paul is correct that we had a briefing the night before, but the briefing did not give any mention of the axing. It only said they were asking Ofcom for permission. They didn't say what for. There was no detail of the number of proposed redundancies that were intended to be made. The only concrete bit of information we were given was that there would be a 2-week VR window that was opened up, and that the consultation would be 30 days. And from that, we can assume that the legal requirement for 30 days is if you're making between 20 and 100 redundant. But we weren't given any specific figures. My clear advice to management at that point was you cannot go in front of 90 journalists and not answer these questions. And particularly some of the best journalists in Scotland who are, as members of this committee may be familiar, are very good at getting answers from people. So that was how it was delivered. I can tell you that there is an absolute lack of faith in management, both over the lack of plans and that the way this is delivered. The National Union of Journalists members have passed, as you will have seen at the end of Annex E, our members have passed a vote of no confidence in the leadership team at STV, who they accuse of financial mismanagement, and they say they have no faith in their ability at the moment.
I think you've answered two of the questions I was going to come up with. I mean, obviously, I think it's pretty obvious for those I've spoken to that morale is extraordinarily low at the company, and confidence is low. I was just going to follow up on what you said. That the member of staff that you reported may have been on holiday. Is that a member of staff at a level that you would expect them to have been there in person if this level of announcement was being made to this number of people?
My advice, and occasionally with editors and senior managers, is in a difficult situation with staff, you over-communicate, you look them in the eye, you make yourself available for that. And yes, it was a member of staff who yeah. You might have expected to be able to do that. It is uncomfortable, but it is it is something that if you do that, the staff respect that you are delivering a difficult message. And
there's been that lack of follow-up information, and that's been another issue, as you
absolutely.
If I can, say, conscious of time, if I can kind of move on. Two things. I mean, firstly, STV is the only part of Channel 3 network that's not part of ITV. Is there a concern that its independence, that this may lead in future to its independence being impacted?
I referred earlier on to events around 2007, and you know, at that time, SMG, as it was known then, was keen to be a media empire, buying magazines and newspapers and all sorts of things, and getting further and further into financial difficulties, and everybody expected it to go to ITV at that point. And at that point, the common consensus was if it goes to ITV, it becomes a local news opt-out. Scotland loses any control over its public sector broadcasting, and it loses, you know, the importance of the cultural messages and the diversity that people in the disparate parts of Scotland want to see. And this is why I, you know, voice concerns here about a change in direction. You know, we ditch the Aberdeen news programme. You know, and we talk about the changing trends from, you know, from broadcast news to digital news. We've known about that for 20 years. That's a red herring. You know, there are issues there that, from both sides that need to be addressed. But we go off and take a punt on a radio station. You know, if the share price starts dropping further, you know, if investors lose faith in STV, which they could easily do if these plans become unstuck, then it's not impossible to see a scenario where ITV may say, you know what, let's get in there, buy it up cheap, ditch the rest of the staff and make ourselves a few bob. So I wouldn't rule that out as a possibility if things go badly wrong for STV. But one of the biggest frustrations, I think, for the staff when you're talking about the staff being demoralised is Aberdeen does particularly well in terms of local and regional advertising. The sales staff, the creative teams in Glasgow and Aberdeen meet and exceed their targets on a regular basis. And you now want to get rid of those staff who are delivering that income for you. That's why people feel demoralised. We've done everything you've asked for us. We've delivered your profits from our bit of the business, and now you want to get short of us.
And that's, of course, that's also tied into viewing figures, which also have held up as well. Nick, do you want to add anything to that?
Only briefly. Absolutely, the STV looks exceptionally vulnerable to a takeover now, and that would add increased uncertainty. The share price was clearly very fragile. It fell absolutely dramatically. It has not recovered. Management's statements of what they intend to do have not done that. However, I mean, to echo what Paul has said, the STV North programme is extraordinarily successful, both in terms of driving in advertising, both in terms of quality journalism, in terms of local journalism. It has over 40% share, and you know, it is a success story. The axing of something which is so successful and such high quality journalism would be catastrophic for within the journalism landscape in Scotland.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Dr Allen?
I'm interested in what you had to say about cultural impact, and specifically, I suppose, thinking about the impact of these decisions on the news landscape in Scotland. Now, you've alluded to the fact, I think, that there's been a declining circulation in Scottish titles and local titles over the last few years. Scotland doesn't feel, anecdotally, like a country compared to other countries that's saturated with information or interrogation of current affairs in Scotland. And I'm just interested to know what you feel the removal of a news programme and a body of journalists does to Scotland's collective ability to interrogate public affairs and current affairs in Scotland.
From Bector's point of view, I think it's all the more important that we protect news programming that is delivered from areas like the north of Scotland and from the Central Belt within public service broadcasting. You're right, you can get any amount of information. We're all saturated with information. I get members calling me every day saying, do you know, Grock is telling me I could get 200 grand out of this case if you take them to a tribunal. And, you know, we're sitting there bewildered by the nonsense that people see online. You know, so it's because of all the nonsense and the disinformation that is available in unregulated spaces, it's all the more important that we have quality public service broadcasting that, you know, and people call me an old dinosaur, but it'd be good to get back to the days where people can say, do you know, if you want the facts, go and listen to the radio, switch on the evening news. You know, that's where you'll get the facts. You might not agree with the facts, you might not like the facts, but you will get the facts. And through the licence fee, through an independent Scottish broadcaster committed to the licence fees, there's no guarantee we'll get that quality of information.
And presumably going into an election, it's particularly disappointing that us guys are not going to be interrogated to the same extent if there are fewer news outlets out there that are, as you say, doing that interrogative work.
Absolutely. There won't be that quality of journalism. There won't be that quality of, you know, there won't be that quality of programme, you know, particularly, you know, in either of the licence areas.
So can I ask, two of the things that have been put forward, if you like, as I don't know, apologies or sweeteners by the looks of it, are, you mentioned one of them, which is the radio station, and the other is the commitment to keeping studio facilities on a standby basis, whatever that means. Do you think the former is about making money, or is it about the radio station, or is it about trying to present this idea that somehow there will be some continuing news presence? And on the studio, what do you make of this commitment to keep a studio open on a standby basis?
Very briefly, what was said to me in regards to the radio station was it's a no-brainer, it's easy advertising.
So it's nothing to do with news?
It's nothing to do with news whatsoever. You know, from a company that's got no experience in running radio stations in a hugely overcrowded market. And in terms of the Aberdeen situation, maintaining a studio, that's probably even more insulting to the people in the north of Scotland, and particularly to the staff. You know, we're going to keep a studio in Aberdeen, maybe one or two operators, so that if things go badly wrong in Glasgow, we've got disaster recovery in Aberdeen.
So you mean a power cut in Glasgow or something?
If anything goes wrong in Glasgow that they can't put the programme on air, they're only maintaining the studio in Aberdeen for disaster recovery purposes, so that they can then drive the programme from Aberdeen. So it's like, we're getting rid of all of you, but we need a couple of you to stay on in case things go wrong in Glasgow. I mean, that's just, you know, it's beyond words how that makes staff in Aberdeen feel.
Thank you, Convener.
Nick, did you want to come in on that point?
Yes, simply to say that the company, I hope members of this committee will see through this idea of the studio being mothballed, because it is a way for the leadership at STV to say, not admit they have spent all this money on a newsroom. They have presenters there. They have all the infrastructure there. And all of a sudden, they are doing a U-turn on that decision. It is absolutely clear. Of course, they're saying they're mothballing it. They're saying it's for disaster recovery. I believe there's only been one situation I can think of in the last decade where perhaps that's come about. But fundamentally, their plan is simply to do an enormous U-turn on what they were doing only a few months ago, in fact, only a few weeks ago, and to do that. And it's an absolute, if we're looking for waste of money within STV, to actually invest that money and then propose that it's simply thrown away is ridiculous.
I think my sense of it so far is the committee does see through that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. Can I also draw attention to my register of members' interest that shows I'm an associate member of the NUJ? Good morning. Several members have touched on issues that I was keen to explore, but I don't want to repeat ground that we've gone over already. Can I then ask you, from the union's point of view, you mentioned ITV before, the contrast between STV and ITV. ITV doesn't hold a single licence for all the other regions. It holds a clutch of licences, and they involve similar commitments to regionality. Are you aware of ITV seeking similar permission from Ofcom to what STV is seeking to reduce that commitment to regional output that their licences require them? Have there been similar examples of this elsewhere? If Ofcom were to approve this, would it potentially open the floodgates for a dramatic reduction in regionality, not just in Scotland, but across all of the ITV regions?
I'm personally not aware of Ofcom approving any similar request from ITV. I've had some experience in the dark and dim past of representing members at both Border and Tyne Tees Television. And, you know, from my experience, if you reduce the commitments in those regions any further, then you don't have any TV stations in those regions. There's very little left of them. But I'm not aware specifically of any request by ITV along the same lines as STV.
There has been agreement in the past to produce or broadcast a programme that is anchored from outside the licence area. That has happened in ITV. I don't believe it's happened for the better. I've spoken to our members who were involved when that went through, and it was some time ago. But we have to remember that the northeast of Scotland and Angus, we have a catchment area of 1.3 million. That is a huge part of Scotland with very different sort of local priorities, need for local news, and so on. And we have to remember that in the Channel Islands there are broadcast licences for much, much smaller areas that manage to have a locally anchored programme with local news, and the argument that STV should be allowed to rip up its commitments for 1.3 million people is really doesn't bear any scrutiny.
Yeah, I mean, I take the point that there may have been a change to where one programme might have been produced, but I'm not aware of anything on this scale, which would effectively be the abandonment of a region. It would be merging two regions effectively in terms of, certainly in terms of the viewers' perceptions of what they're served with. Do you share my concern that if Ofcom were to say yes to this proposal from STV, it would then be very, very difficult for them to say no to ITV if they wanted to cut their costs in similar ways and reduce regional commitments? This is not just about one region. This is actually about the fundamental principle of regionality throughout the Channel 3 service everywhere, isn't it?
Absolutely. I'll come in, Paul.
All right, yeah, you go next.
I mean, you're absolutely right that there are other companies in ITV that will be looking for this, and it will be a ratchet to the bottom. And they will go to Ofcom if this is approved and say, well, if it was approved here, why wasn't it approved? Why can't we approve it there? And then the next time, and we will see gradual reduction in news, quality broadcast journalism, not just in the sort of central and north of Scotland, but throughout the UK. And it is absolutely, that cannot happen. To pick up on another point, though, it's absolutely crucial that Ofcom does have the ability to take in all viewpoints into account. Now, to my knowledge, they haven't announced how long they're going to consult for, but my belief, And my belief in everything that has come back is that it's going to be for a 4-week period. That is not long enough. It needs to be 10 weeks. It needs to be the maximum. We need to hear the voices of the communities involved. We need to have maximum engagement in this. The argument that has been made by STV is when the BBC Scotland cut the 9, that was a 4-week consultation, but that was a very, very different situation. Paul and I were both involved with that. It was seen coming by the staff. There were no job losses. There were different programmes put into places at different times. The BBC came to us with a plan, and we worked with them on that plan. On this one, no. STV or the Ofcom will need to consult for 10 weeks to get in the maximum amount of opinions from the communities affected.
You've directly anticipated what was going to be my last question, which is the process from here on. The idea of a 4-week consultation would see this decision made, I think, not just before the opportunity to hear wider views from the workforce, from the viewers and from the wider community, but also for political scrutiny, both here and at Westminster, where I think the Scottish Affairs Committee are taking an interest as well. What do you think can be done to ensure that Ofcom slow down, give the time that's required for proper scrutiny of this, and really for the long-term implications for all viewers in the regions immediately affected, but right throughout the UK, for the long-term implications to really sink in about quite how profound a change this could be?
I think it would certainly help with this committee lobbying Ofcom to ask for a reasonable period of time. And just going back to the BBC situation, they had other news provision across BBC Scotland. They were proposing an alternative news programme to Ofcom. It wasn't just a case of, let's cut off the news service to half the country. But there were one of the disappointing things about the 4-week window was that people weren't given time to consider the implications of that. There was a significant downturn in employment as a result of closing the 9, particularly for freelance members. The shift to the 7 o'clock news has had a massive impact on our freelance members who have lost work because of the loss of the 9. And again, the knock-on implications for freelance work in the north of Scotland in particular, people have to be given time to assess that and contribute to a reasonable debate about that. And particularly given the implications that ITV could be sitting there saying, well, if they get away with one licence, we want to get away with one licence. Ofcom needs to be made to realise this isn't just a Scotland issue. This is a UK-wide issue with serious implications. And the more that, members of this Parliament and this committee and the wider community can get that across to Ofcom, they have to realise this needs a considerable amount of time to consider it. I know, the Scottish Affairs Committee is looking at this issue in the next 2 weeks as well. So I think it's incumbent on everybody at every level to pressure Ofcom to at least a 10 or 12-week period to consider this properly.
Thank you.
To echo the point I made before, the axing of the STV North programme will be an act of cultural vandalism in Scotland. There needs to be proper consultation. The company needs to have a proper plan. We are prepared to work with it when it is looking at there. We are mindful that all these companies work in commercial situations, and we are willing to work with them on that. But this is not the way. It is a knee-jerk reaction to what may turn out to be a short-term solution. There is a longer argument about public service broadcasting there. The argument I'm hearing back for the 4-week consultation is that it's better for everyone. And I can say, although we're in collective consultation, I can't think who this is better for. It is better for management, who will not enjoy their time at the committee today. They will not enjoy their time at the Scottish Affairs Committee in Westminster, and they would like it to be over as soon as possible. But viewers in Scotland, journalists in Scotland, need to have the ability to make sure that any decision is well thought through here. I'll give a practical example. There is a petition that began on the Westminster website to save the programme. But that is currently held in a queue of it has reached 20 petitions, now it needs to be reviewed, and the last time I checked, it hadn't actually properly opened. Now, that is the sort of small-term thing that rallies support around something, and 4 weeks becomes ridiculously short under those circumstances. 10 weeks, the maximum allowed for what is really the maximum amount of change that STV could think of done, allows everyone involved. It allows politicians, it allows viewers, it allows business leaders, and it allows the trade unions to enter into this conversation rather than having railroaded through as a fait accompli.
Thank you both.
Mr Kerr?
Well, I have to declare an interest. I grew up with Grampian TV. It started about the same time that I was born. And effectively, what this announcement does is ends North East Broadcasting, doesn't it? I mean, there are 2 licences here, as has been repeated by a number of colleagues now. They're effectively giving up STV North. Is that right?
That's my opinion. You know, I became an official not long before Grampian ended, but I attended numerous meetings where the directors of Grampian TV assured me they would die in a ditch before they sold off Grampian, and they kept those commitments up right until the point they took the money and ran, and the staff were left holding the baby, and the staff have suffered for that since then. I believe without, you know, a news programme, without quality programmes being made in the north of Scotland, you've effectively just got STV Scotland, that's it.
Yeah, they're effectively giving up the licence. That's what this announcement is, right?
I'll add a point on this, talking about the news landscape generally. If you want a better BBC Scotland in Aberdeen, in the North East, you need a strong STV. That competition drives great journalism, absolutely, on both sides. And there are great journalists working at the BBC, great journalists working at STV, and there are great journalists working at the Press and Journal as well, looking for local stories, looking for local angles. And the fact that there is competition in that area for different bits of journalism is absolutely crucial to holding democracy to account and keeping people informed about what's happening in their area. So the knock-on effect, we've talked about the knock-on effect of what it has immediately for those viewers, but also the effect it has on other news organisations is, well, we can relax a wee bit because there isn't STV leading with a story that we don't have at the moment.
Have you both met with the management of STV since they announced this 2 weeks ago?
We haven't met with the chief executive, but we have met with...
you met with the leadership team in Glasgow?
Yes.
And what you said, they didn't give you any kind of detail, but they've come up with this number, 3 million, and they've come up with this number, 60 jobs. Is it right there's no management jobs in the profile of these 60 jobs?
They've done a number of briefings departmentally. Following the overall staff town hall, managers have gone round department by department, and they're saying, this is what we think our department might look like after this exercise is complete. And in a number of these departments, certainly our members have fed back to me, you know, somebody in each department said, so none of the managers facing the...
So there's no management jobs?
There are no management jobs that we're aware of that are at risk. One department has been quoted to me as saying, if they go ahead with the number of cuts they want in our department, there will be 8 managers left, which is 1 manager for each member of staff. Right.
So there is really no rational basis for the 3,060,000 jobs. Is a finger in the air job, is it? There's no detail behind this.
Well,
they're going around the departments with, you know, basically identifying people that are not managers that will possibly lose their jobs.
Yes, the starting point, as I understand it, the way STV have described it to me, is we want to save about 3 million a year in ongoing costs, which is around about 60 jobs. But we'll be flexible, and we can be flexible on that depending who comes forward, etc., and depending on what Ofcom says. So the 3 million is the kind of is the driver for this, and everything else is a bit fluffy at the moment.
You have identified a key component of the structure of STV. We had the briefing the night before the announcement to staff, which told us next to nothing. We've had another meeting which, again, did not put forward any kind of structure of a new organisation, what it might look like if Ofcom agree, and what it might look like if Ofcom don't agree. We're very much in the dark, but the only thing that they have done is say, yes, managers are safe under this structure. And I think at the moment, in some places, there's one manager to two members of staff, and two at this early stage where no plan exists, but that managers are going to be kept. Who are these people going to manage if 30 journalists are axed from the newsroom? I mean, and that is a huge proportion. What are these managers going to do? If there does need to be a plan and laid out, we want to see a proportionate amount of cuts. Now, we've talked about overall, there are 60 across the organisation of 650 people, but 30 of those are apparently going to happen in a newsroom of 150 people, and they're not going to affect the managers. That seems a very clear targeting of the people who bring journalism to Scottish viewers.
What's your take on the appointment of the new chairman? Because he comes with a corporate reputation for spin-offs, disposals. What do you read into that? What's your take?
My take is, you know, for the first time probably since 2007, I'm concerned that, you know, a sell-off to ITV is a real possibility. It certainly should be in the middle of people's minds, if not at the back of people's minds, because of the decisions that are being taken just now and because of the significant change away from sort of Rob Woodward's mantra of quality programmes and digital media services. That was it, clear and simple, and it's worked for 20 years. Now we're seeing start to see something different, and as you say, you know, a chairman with that expertise. You know, throughout Rob Woodward's tenure and Simon Pitt's tenure, the commitment from the board was always about it's vital we maintain an independent Scottish broadcaster owned in Scotland, based in Scotland, and I'm not seeing that commitment anymore.
But the STV Group seem to be more ambitious for STV Studios in terms of the next few years than they are for the broadcaster. Is that a fair comment, or is that interpretive?
STV Studios last year delivered about 25% of STV's net profit. 5-10 years ago, it would have been a minimal percentage. And again, this is sort of a development of, you know, Rob Woodward, Simon Pitt's idea that they've long desired to be a significant player in the production market.
Yeah. And
I can see the sense in that. It works in tandem with what they're doing, and it is delivering, you know, big money to them. So, and they talk in the reports about wanting to turn it into a £200 million business.
Yeah.
Not quite sure they'll get there just yet or for a while, but I do think it sits well with what they're doing as a quality broadcaster, because without that quality broadcasting, without those quality programmes, you're not attracting viewers to the channel.
Yeah, although the nature of the market in terms of content creation, production and broadcast is radically different than it was even 5 years ago.
Yes.
So they may be interpreting that trend and deciding that the future for the business lies in the production element, and therefore they're stripping out cost across the broadcaster in order to prepare it to be disposed.
Potentially, yes.
Right.
Like you, I looked deeply at the background of the managing director. It clearly was something that spread alarm of why that particular set of expertise was needed at this time in this organisation. The one thing I would say is that, as a minimum for the chief executive and the managing director, the very minimum or what they should be aspiring to is to have the confidence of shareholders and the confidence of staff, and at the moment they have neither. And we can see that from the share price, we can see that from the meetings of our members and the feedback that we get back, that the current leadership have no confidence from shareholders and no confidence from staff, and that is very, very worrying.
Thank you.
Convener, we've rightly discussed the impact that this will have on the STV North area, but also you've alluded to the impact this will have on other areas, Glasgow in the west, Edinburgh in the east. Now, rightly, there obviously will be huge concerns in Aberdeen about the impact in Aberdeen, but do you think there is enough understanding about the impact that this will have on regional news in Glasgow in the west and Edinburgh in the east? Because we will lose, under these proposals, a dedicated STV North programme, but also the news in Glasgow and the West and Edinburgh East will be diluted as a result. For example, in Renfrewshire last year, STV News ably covered a campaign by local parents in Renfrewshire who were campaigning to get the childcare policies of Renfrewshire Council reversed. They covered that before a council meeting and after the council meeting as well. It was those sort of local news angles in Glasgow and the West that I think are really in jeopardy as well if we don't have a change of decision on what the STV are planning. Do you think people understand the impact that this is going to have on the central belt and not just the north of Scotland?
I think from the staff's perspective, every single one of our members in Glasgow, particularly the ones who support the work in the newsroom, the technical and operations staff, they're sitting there just now saying, we understand what the proposal is for the Aberdeen programme, but we are all still worried we're going to lose our jobs as a result of this exercise. And as I've talked about earlier, the wider staff across the company, mainly based in Glasgow, are concerned that they're losing their jobs. But what they're also concerned about is that people don't lose track of the importance of these proposals, because I see companies, I see managers saying, well, the story you're talking about in Paisley, this is the reason that we need to have such a good digital presence so that we can reflect all these stories. But then they talk about the decline of broadcast audiences. So to me, with my limited experience, they're two different audiences. Younger people get their information online. Older people, those people who are older than me, I'm in the younger category, the older people like the broadcast news. So the people who are most likely to be affected by the kind of story you're talking about, they're not going to get the story because they don't want to go online or can't find their way online to get the information there. So stories relevant to the local communities right across Scotland, it will be lost because you're going from 2 programmes to 1.
Nick, do you have any further comments?
I do. One thing that is notable in and I've talked about, the company has not come to us with a plan, it's not come to us with any internal structures, and it's not come to us with any idea of what the News at 6 would look like in a world where it does not have the Aberdeen newsroom. How that would done, how do you divide that, where is news going to come from, is there 5 minutes here, is there 10 minutes here? Now, I'm led to believe that such a plan exists, but they're not showing it to anyone, and the reason they're not showing to anyone, I think there'd be outcry when there was, because it's absolutely right, it's not just the North East that benefits from great local journalism, it is Glasgow and Edinburgh and the Borders and so on, where we have fantastic journalism. And we have journalists who at the moment have the time to go and commit to stories and work on stories. STV as a newsroom runs extremely lean. I mean, the Aberdeen newsroom, I think, has 37 people and does a very efficient job. And need I say it, the News at 6 outperforms the BBC in the same time slot. It does a fantastic job with a much smaller news gathering organisation, but quite a lot of skills. And it's that ability to be able to go into communities, to spend that. What is this going to look like with 30 fewer staff? There's going to be increased stress, there's going to be increased workload, there's going to be more pressure to do easy stories and a move away from the more difficult stories that take time to do. And that is going to be a reduction in quality journalism throughout the 2 licence areas.
Thank you for that answer. I think that illustrates all the more importance of having a full Ofcom consultation, given the impact it will have not just on STV North, but the whole of Scotland. So I concur with everything you said about that. Thanks.
Could I have a question before I bring in colleagues that are not members of the committee but have joined us today? Mr McGowan-Lowe, you opened with talking about the commitment to journalism and the commitment to good journalism in Scotland. In following up from Mr Bibby's point of view, we've also heard about half the country. I think that was a term you used, Mr McManus. But the truth is that people in the borders don't get a local news, don't get that presence because the licence there is covered by ITV Borders, and very often they're not getting a Scottish perspective at all. So relation to the Ofcom looking at how the licence works for it, and the public being the Scottish people who are about to get into an election next year, do you think that when Ofcom in front of us, we should be examining just how the licence fee responds to the public, and is it filling that public sector part of what the licences should be for in terms of news in Scotland?
There's very much a wider debate to be had about sort of regions, nations and coverage of local news. You're absolutely right about ITV border. TV transmitters are placed on hills, and hills and broadcast areas don't always respect national boundaries. So there is always going to be a difficulty with ITV border there. They're never... Scotland itself is never going to be a distinct area when it comes to broadcast signals in that. Having said that, I think I know several of the journalists who cover Scotland for ITV Border, and I have the highest respect for them. I think there's a great deal of quality journalism going on there.
Okay, Mr. McManus, do you want to comment at all?
Yeah, again, I'm no technological expert, but it strikes me as somewhat ironic that we have the technology that allows us to shut the programme in Aberdeen, drive it from Glasgow, but we can't get pictures down to the borders. I think somebody's not being straight with us on that. I mean, we're looking at this in terms of the central Scotland licence and the north of Scotland, licence. And we haven't, we're aware, obviously, of the border licence, but we haven't looked at it from the whole licence picture needs to be reviewed.
Thank you. Colleagues from the elsewhere, I'll begin Miss Nicholl, and then I'll come to Mr Stewart.
Thank you very much, Convener, and thank you for the opportunity to join committee session this morning. Colleagues know that I'm one of the North East MSPs, and in fact, STV North is located in my constituency. I think it is safe to say that STV has felt like the beating heart of news coverage, along with former Grampian TV in the North East for as long as I can remember. So the relocation of STV North to Central Belt is devastating. Brings to an end 60 years of regional news coverage. I'm interested in, I don't mind which of our witnesses comes in, just to hear a bit more detail on the importance of local journalism that really truly understands and is tuned into the sort of social, economic, cultural aspects of the region. And if you agree with me that with the withdrawal of STV North from Aberdeen risks, and I quote, silencing the voice of the North East at a critical time when issues relating to energy transition, the future of the North Sea are of national importance, not just regional importance. And those are the words of the Chief Executive of Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce. And secondly, I wonder if you can provide a sense of the impact of this announcement on the opportunities for future careers, local career opportunities for young people in the North East who may want to break into a career in the media, building their skills, telling local stories that really matter to communities. So I'm interested in what impact this announcement will have on, for example, traineeships, apprenticeships, sustaining a pipeline of top quality North East journalists. And I would sort of draw members' attention to the Robert Gordon University, which is also in my constituency. The School of Journalism also has a very strong collaboration with STV North through student placements, but also through a memorial bursary for John MacDonald, that wonderful former editor who was with STV for many, many years and who is remembered through this bursary opportunity. So maybe come to Paul McManus first.
I think there's a number of things to consider here. Simply, the basic facts are that if we go to one programme from Glasgow, the comments made by the Chair of the Chamber of Commerce, multiply that right across the north of Scotland, where there's a whole host of industries, there's a whole host of areas affected by what happens in the North Sea and, you know, and in other sectors. You're simply not going to hear those stories. You're not going to hear those concerns, you know, and you're probably not going to get very much airtime if you're campaigning to be re-elected next year either, because they physically won't have the time. In terms of the industries, the career opportunities, I've already said, in terms of working in television, those opportunities are gone. STV has talked about maintaining reporters and reporting stories across the breadth of Scotland. But equally, what they're not telling you is that most of those stories are supported by freelance workers. Mm-hmm. And those freelancers rely on a critical mass of employment over the course of the year to be able to stay in the industry. Mm-hmm. And if I know if those stories simply can't be told in the north of Scotland because of the lack of time, because of one programme, then that work won't be available for the freelance members. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, BEC2 has a massive training programme for freelance workers in the film and TV industries, and we take a lot of courses to Inverness, to the Highlands, to Aberdeen, and the demand for those courses, the demand for places in universities will simply fall off a cliff edge because there won't be any work opportunities for people. Mm-hmm. And what you will see is people who could have had a career in Scotland moving down to London, you know, because there aren't even that many opportunities, you know, in the Central Belt. It will be a transition of skills, people and culture away from the north of Scotland.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll echo what Paul has said, but I will say that, I mean, I've worked in the journalism industry for 30 years, whether as a journalist or as a trade union official, and I've seen a huge amount of changes. But I like you, Robert Gordon University has a fantastic journalism department. It makes sure that there are students out with the skills to go out and do great journalism. It has great connections industrially as well. I was speaking up there, I think, a few weeks ago, and one of their graduates was there who was a current STV journalist, and I think they've got about 80 students on their undergraduate course at the moment. But there is real fear there of what this means if STV moves away, if that centre hub that draws in quality journalists into the industry, that brings in young journalists and so on, if that disappears, what that is going to mean for jobs in the North East, what it's going to need for journalism in the North East. And once that is done, the worry is that there are going to be other news organisations that think, well, if the North East isn't that important, maybe we can start chipping away as well. Mm-hmm. So it is, local journalism is absolutely crucial. I can talk about it at much greater length than the committee can afford me today. But there is that, there has always been the sort of culture of people, when I began, people working on local newspapers and then moving up to national newspapers and then maybe moving across the broadcast and so on. And the career paths for people coming into the industry are far fewer and narrower, and you are finding now that people are, you know, having to adapt and be a lot more adaptable for the type of journalism they're produced, simply to have jobs in the industry. And if STV decides to do the withdrawal from the North East that he has done, it has a huge knock-on effect in Aberdeen, in Inverness, and so on, that I don't think we will get back.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks to the committee for allowing us the opportunity to question panels today. And I've got some quick-fire questions, basically. 40% audience share for STV News North, quite phenomenal in today's day and age. If it goes, that audience share will likely drop dramatically. What impact do you think that will have in advertising revenue, and will that hit STV even more? In terms of the proposed radio station, at a time where radio stations, including in the North East, are actually cutting local content, it has been suggested to me that what has been described as the Hayne Pet project that diversification will lead to disaster. Do you agree with that comment? And you've talked about out-of-touch executives. Instead of out-of-touch executives getting bonuses, is it a time for them to have their pay frozen or maybe even cut, as has happened in the past, in order to get over this wee hump of that small loss in this half year? Mr McManus, please.
Thank you. I think, in answer to your first question, is death by 1,000 cuts. If you lose, you know, it's a reversal of the principles that have stood them so well over the past 20 years. You know, if you cut the news and people stop watching the news, people stop watching the programmes, then there's no benefit for the local advertisers, regional advertisers to put their money into the company. So it just becomes death by 1,000 cuts. In terms of, you know, the executives, I have to say, over the years, again, under previous chief executives, there have been, whenever STV has asked the staff to be, you know, accept lower pay increases or no pay increases, they've treated the senior executives in the same way. So I kind of think the question of, you know, the two bonuses I referred to were a bit exceptional, considering one of them was leaving. Yeah. But I kind of think that's a bit of a red herring. Is, you know, what people are paid are not the source of STV's problems. But if you are going to cut staff, then it would seem logical that, well, there's no need to have so many managers if you're cutting staff.
And the radio station?
Interestingly enough, I'll answer that by saying I just recently had a meeting with the new head of audio at BBC Scotland, who is a mega big hitter in terms of radio experience. And, you know, somebody, you know, when they bring in somebody like that to you know, beef up their radio presence, and then I sit in STV and it's an easy windfall, you know, easy advertising kind of thing. This is a complete joke. You're winding me up, you know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they know something we don't. But I just think it's a complete folly at this stage in time.
Mr. McGowan-Lowe, please.
Thank you. I mean, the STV News is one of the jewels of the crown of STV's Channel 3 licences. It is a driver for advertising, not just around it, but for the brand itself. If it's quality, people turn in. If people tune in, then advertisers want to be there. The local news station, I mean, I heard it said as a mitigation. It's not. It is that kind of, it is seen as a pet project that is separate to its licence commitments, and for some reason they have ring-fenced that, and while at the same time asking to spend less money on their actual obligations on public service broadcasting. It was a fact, as you may remember, the NUJ staff at STV went out on strike last year on an improved pay deal. Certainly at that time, the STV chief executive was paid vastly more than the Director General of the BBC, not just the director in Scotland. And the BBC, and just for comparison, you can measure it in many different ways, but STV is an organisation that's a 1/40th, 1 over 40, of the size of the BBC. How that can be justified, I don't know. I think with perhaps, even if they were paid the same as the Director General of the BBC and the rest went into news gathering, you could probably pay for 8 journalist jobs off the top of that. So yes, executive pay is one of the areas that we look at. Where is this company spending money? Traditionally, it's spent it on shareholders, it's spent it on executives, and it has been grudging with its pay deals to staff.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. I think that exhausts questions this morning, because I thank you both for your attendance at committee this morning. We're going to briefly suspend for a few minutes to allow the panels to change over. Thank you.
Thank you.
warm welcome back. Our next agenda item is to continue taking evidence in relation to STV's proposed news changes. We're joined in the room by Rufus Radcliffe, Chief Executive of STV, and Bobby Hayne, Managing Director of Audience, News Regulation and Audio at STV. I welcome you both to committee and invite Mr Radcliffe to make a short opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting us to meet with you today. I'll make a few opening remarks, and then Bobby and I will be pleased to answer any questions you have. STV is an iconic Scottish business. We make money through advertising on our channel STV and our streaming service STV Player, and we make TV shows for other broadcasters and streamers through our studios business, many of them produced in Scotland. We are clear about the long-term strategic direction of our business, but as a commercial public service broadcaster that receives no public funding, the challenges we face are significant, driven by changing viewer behaviour and a very tough macroeconomic backdrop. We are facing declining linear viewing, reduced advertising revenues as companies hold back on spending, and a slowdown in commissioning for STV studios. The scale of structural challenges facing public service media is captured in Ofcom's latest review. The title sums it up: Transmission Critical. These challenges are not unique to STV, but they require a response if we are to remain competitive. We are a regional player in an international marketplace, competing with global streamers with huge budgets and YouTube, the fastest growing service on TV. To deliver our strategy and protect STV's long-term prospects, we must restructure, streamline operations and accelerate our digital transformation, while staying deeply committed to regional news and our public service values. We have done everything possible to protect as many jobs as we can in the long term. However, there will be an impact on some roles now, and as we go through consultations, supporting our colleagues is our priority. Part of our proposal involves changes to news services, reflecting both changing viewer behaviour and economic realities. We have approached Ofcom to amend licences unchanged since 2009. Sharing material from both regions will allow us to deliver high-quality journalism across Scotland, from Inverness, Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Holyrood and Westminster. We will tell these stories both on air and through our growing digital news offering. Our plan is designed to protect regional journalism because it is not financially sustainable in its current form. We're confident that our plan will deliver more stories to more people wherever and however they want to receive them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that opening statement. If I could just open with a question. You said you were very clear about your strategic direction. So in May of this year, you published the Fast Forward to 2030 plan. From reading this, it doesn't give any indication about the decision about Aberdeen Studio and the fact that you've just recently invested £500,000 in the studio there. It comes as somewhat a surprise to hear about the plans now. Is this a knee-jerk reaction to a drop in the share price? Where has this come from?
We are getting on and delivering our strategy that we announced in May. There are two parts of it. One is to deliver Scotland's leading platform for audiences and advertisers, and news is a very important part of how we deliver for our audiences, and will continue to do so. We also announced in May that we are going to be launching a radio station, and that is on track to be launched early in the new year. And the other part of our strategy is to deliver an international content business, and we are determined to deliver on that as well. We have to do this with a financially sustainable cost base. We have to have when you're running a business, there are two things you have to do. You have to have a sustainable cost base, and you have to look to how you grow your business as well. And the changes that we've talked about today are very much about protecting regional news and putting us on a sustainable footing moving forward so that we can deliver our strategy, which will be good for people who work at STV and it will make us a successful business moving forward that everyone benefits from.
In terms of the licence itself, obviously you're operating as a public sector broadcaster within Ofcom's licensing. But to my mind, the reason we have different licences in different regions is because you cannot have a homogenous response to those regions. Do you think that you're meeting the public sector broadcasting commitments for that licence with this proposal, given that it wasn't part of the proposal that this would be happening?
What we are doing with these proposals is putting regional news on a sustainable footing moving forward. The amount of viewing on linear news is in very rapid decline. If you look at the first half of this year versus the first half of last year, there is a 23% decline in the amount of viewing to news on STV News at 6. At the same time, we know that digital consumption is growing enormously. We have about 50 million video views a month online of STV News. I think everyone here will be familiar about the amount of fake news, the amount of misinformation online. We know that STV News is enormously trusted, so it is important that we reflect where viewing behaviour is going and that the quality of STV News is reflected in the digital space, where we know, to be frank, the truth is at risk, and we have to accelerate that, and we have to reflect what viewing behaviour is doing. A 23% decline in volume of viewing in the first half of this year versus the first half of last year is very stark. What we are doing is building a plan that protects regional news and reflects what viewers are doing.
Yeah, I'm going to move to questions from the committee. I'll bring in Mr Halker-Johnson.
Thanks very much. There are so many questions I could ask, but I know we've got limited time, so I will focus in on them. But just the one thing you talked about there, you're looking to streamline the service. You talked about looking to move where viewers are going. Obviously, STV News is still performing well. You talked about the licences being unchanged since 2009, but you signed a new 10-year licence in only January of this year. Were you aware then, or concerned then, at the very least, that you may not be able to fulfil your obligations?
Ofcom and ourselves are aware of viewing declines. We renewed the licence for another 10 years, but licences are while they're renewed for 10 years, they are as conditions change, provisions in the licence need to be adapted. You will see the report that Ofcom made in July this year called Transmission Critical, that very much outlined the difficulties in funding regional news and the challenges of public service media.
So can I come in, because we are limited. Did you sign that contract, that obligation, that new licence, on the understanding or the belief that you may have to change it, or you may have to take the action you're taking now?
We renewed our licence for the next 10 years. We are obviously aware of the provisions within it, but as the market changes and as the regulator itself signalled the fundamental change in the way people watch TV, now is the right time to review how we deliver those licences.
So less than a year later, you are now looking at reneging on your contract obligations.
We're not looking at reneging. We are looking at delivering for our licences in a way that reflect how viewers are consuming content.
I feel others may come back on this,
Sure.
So I will kind of move through. A number of questions I wanted to ask. How was the news of redundancies or potential redundancies broken to staff?
Well, we have 500 people at STV across multiple offices. So like most businesses now, when you have to talk to all of your colleagues at the same time, this is a very big announcement. We use Zoom, which is a standard way of communicating to many people all at the same time, as you can imagine.
Yeah, and it's been suggested that certainly one or maybe a number of senior figures were online and on holiday at the time. Is that the case? It's a yes or no?
No. Well, look, there is a mischaracterisation of what happened. We have all of our senior leaders were present in a very important meeting, and Bobby cancelled his holiday and brought it forward because of the significance of what we're doing here. So there is a very clear mischaracterisation of what's happened here. We had a Zoom call. We spoke to all colleagues. We've then had subsequent follow-up face-to-face with all of the organisation. We know this is a big change. We know this is difficult. We know this is about people's jobs. So we have done everything that we can to be clear and transparent with people.
Okay, again, that may be something others want to follow up. But one of the criticisms that the union says that wasn't follow-up with information and details.
There has been follow-up with all members of the organisation.
Has there been enough information provided to them about the plans, what may happen?
It's very high level at this point. We've opened a voluntary redundancy programme as well, so obviously that's a big indicator.
So what does high level mean in this context?
Well, we've given the shape of the plan, the shape of the plans not only for news, where we've talked about bringing gallery and presentation into Glasgow, but the plans that we've outlined now, because of the changing in viewing habits and the macroeconomic picture, they don't just impact news. There are 60 roles impacted across all of STV. Okay. So when we did the Zoom call, it wasn't just the news teams we were talking to. We were communicating with all of our organisation, and then we had subsequent calls, face-to-face conversations with everyone.
Some of the issues that have been raised with me, particularly as a Highlands Island MSP, will be the kind of cultural sports impact. Some of the coverage will be reduced, airtime squeeze. One other concern that was raised was some of the regional stories that maybe start as regional stories, but then develop into major stories. That kind of exposure at the start of that story will be reduced, and then we may not have seen cases like the Dundee University funding crisis, the LGML case, develop into the really serious stories, the national stories they were. Is that a concern that you have?
We will make sure that all stories from across Scotland are properly captured. I think with the viewing decline that we have in linear, it is really important that we can get deeper into those stories online as well, with longer reports that have a longer shelf life online. I mean,
you're suggesting that online will be, and obviously we all recognise where things perhaps are going, but there's still a huge number of people that rely on the terrestrial channels, particularly older people, and that is why there is an obligation within the licence. So moving everything online isn't a solution. And from what you're saying, you're not denying that there will be less potential online coverage of some of these kind of cases.
What we're saying is that we will cover all the stories that matter to all of Scotland, and we will continue to have editorial coverage of the north of Scotland at 6 p.m. We will have editorial hubs in Glasgow and Aberdeen, and the decisions we made to reflect the stories that matter. The changes that we're making will result in more stories for more people and going where viewers are going. But the 6 p.m. show that we will make will continue to reflect the stories that matter for all of Scotland.
One former news chief at Grampian told me his opinion of STV is that you're only paying lip service to news gathering. You're not interested in news from the north of Scotland, just the Central Belt. And that this move was inevitable because STV are just money orientated. Why is he wrong?
Look, we're running a business, and we have to run a profitable business and part of running a profitable business is to ensure that we fulfil our public service obligations. That is a big priority for us. STV News is a huge part of what we do. It's incredibly important, but it costs a lot of money. It costs £8.5 million a year. And advertisers advertise across all parts of STV. They advertise against our drama and our entertainment, and actually only 3% of our output is news, and our advertisers are looking for the biggest audiences that they can possibly get.
In terms of the 3 million of cuts that you're looking at, how much do you anticipate saving from cutting the service to the north?
We're not going to break down. We're not going to break down that. We're obviously in a voluntary redundancy period at the moment. We're in consultation and we're talking to our people, so we're not going to break that down.
You can't tell us what they're saving.
No, because we're in a consultation period. We've got a voluntary redundancy window open, and we're talking to our colleagues.
Okay. Well, market confidence in STV is falling. We've seen the share price fall heavily. Staff morale is on the floor. We're hearing that from the unions and those that we know. and obviously these plans are going to impact on public confidence. If Ofcom don't approve your plans, what happens?
Well, we've been in consultation with Ofcom, and they will do a consultation on this piece of work. As I said earlier, the transmission critical report that they came out in July lays out in stark terms the challenge of funding public service media. There is a lot of stuff that we can do without Ofcom permission. We can bring our gallery and our presentation into Glasgow. But if we don't get permission by Ofcom to do everything that we're proposing, we will obviously have alternatives. But it's not appropriate to discuss that here today because that obviously impacts colleagues.
One of the issues that's being kind of highlighted and touched upon was the future of STV and what the kind of intentions are. If Ofcom does accept your proposal, does it make STV a more attractive target for a takeover?
This is about putting us on a financially sustainable footing, making us competitive as an independent business moving forward, and that is the plan that myself and everyone at STV is determined to deliver.
Okay, I'll leave it for that.
Thank you. Mr Brown.
Thanks very much. I should really start by congratulating STV because in this election year I've seen the unique outcome that you've managed to unite all the political parties against this proposal, which takes some doing, to be honest. I wonder though, given your experience as a professional in the area, are you able to comment at all on any kind of comparative information about once this went through, if it was to go through, the nature of the diversity of local broadcast media in Scotland as compared with other countries of a similar size? Are you able to say how, because we heard earlier on, for example, there were licences granted in the Channel Islands for much smaller areas. With only what was left of the BBC, and they're cutting back with River City, and what's proposed here, what would be the comparative health, do you think, of the diversity of local broadcast media in Scotland?
Bobby, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that the changes that Rufus has outlined go beyond television and have affected radio, for example, in Scotland, where the ecology is very different. I think the best comparison is probably with other regions of the same size in the Channel 3 network, where...
Do you see Scotland as a region?
No, I think in terms of really the unitary unit of the Channel 3 system, Scotland has currently twice as much output from Channel 3 as other nations do. So Northern Ireland and Wales have half the output that we have, and in fact less than half. And if you took a similarly sized region in England, then again they have about half the amount that, in fact, about a quarter of what we have in Scotland, 2 or 3 hours of output of news. There's no current affairs, which we do. So all of the programming which is not news, such as our Scotland current affairs programmes, Scotland Tonight and so on and so forth, will remain in place. I'm not really clear on other country comparators, but we can obviously draw comparisons in the obligations and the news output of our service versus other Channel 3 licences within the system, because that's the system we are familiar with.
I'll only have 2 other questions. There's lots of members wanting to come in, but just going back to the points that were being made previously about the licence commitment, do you understand that the licensing process is there to protect the public interest? People looking at this, seeing you agreeing to a licence this year, that started this year, and trying to dramatically reduce the licensing commitments, whilst at the same time making commitments which are not licence requirements, just makes the licensing process itself look a mockery. Would you comment on that?
I mean, we've already talked about this. We renewed the licence, but the speed of change of viewing behaviour has accelerated and got faster and faster. The licence doesn't reflect how we need to accelerate in digital. We're having conversations with Ofcom about it. Their report came out saying transmission critical in July. So the regulator recognises the speed of change here, and so we are in discussions with them. They will do a consultation, as we know. And it is for the regulator to decide.
I'm not sure you're grasping the point that the public looking at this will just think the licensing process was a complete sham. But to go with my last question, you've said, and for good reason I'm sure, that you're not able to break down the £3 million of savings and where that might come from. Can you put a figure on what it's costing you and is likely to cost you for the establishment of the radio station, and a figure on what it is for bonuses for senior executive, just to give us an idea of the context?
Well, there will be no bonus payments this year, to be clear, and it's a very modest investment in radio, but I'll come back to the point I made earlier, which is not only important that we have a sustainable cost base, it's really important that we grow our business. If we grow our business moving forward, that allows us to deliver our public service obligations as well. Radio is a very modest investment. It will be profitable by 2027. It's on track to be delivered next year. It is really, really important that we grow our business.
Just by modest investment, I'm just looking for a figure. Bearing in mind this was not a licence requirement, how much has been spent on this?
Well, this year it's £500,000, but I'm not going to break down our business plan for you here today because obviously that's confidential, but it's profitable by 2027. The launch is on track. We have to grow our business.
And just, sorry, last point, on the gallery and the facility in Aberdeen, which is to become, I think it's called a reserve facility. Now, that was money, £500,000 spent on that, and you're honestly saying that it's a reasonable thing to have that as a reserve facility, that we're going to ship people up to Aberdeen at short notice if there's a problem in Glasgow. Is it just a sham to cover for the fact that you should not have invested that money if you weren't going to use that facility?
Bobby, do you want to comment on that?
I think both in terms of the licences and the investment in our Aberdeen facility, which I think goes to the commitment to our news gathering in the north, that was an earlier question too. We are retaining all of our bases in the north, in Dundee, in Aberdeen and Dundee. And the stories you asked about in Dundee would tomorrow be reported and developed by our team in Dundee as they were previously, and they will find audiences on television and online. So that commitment to finding stories that start region, every story is local to somewhere generally, and finding those stories is what we will continue to do. And to the point on the Aberdeen infrastructure, that's a really important part of what we do, because still having teams making news, creating stories and participating in our programmes means that they will be in the studio day in, day out. But it is also crucial for us to have a backup facility so that we can't have a single studio which may need maintenance or may develop a problem or may not have power and so on. So we do have to have an alternative. And crucially, we have invested over a multi-year period because we made the decision 2 or 3 years ago to invest that CapEx. It has just finished, but this is a long process that we've just completed.
It will appear odd to people, and I think to Ofcom as well, that you said you're trying to protect regional news gathering, but you're doing that by getting rid of the infrastructure to deliver it. But that wasn't a question, just a comment. Kabina, thanks.
Thank you. Good morning. I suppose I do want to just start by acknowledging this will be a personally uncomfortable experience for you, answering questions of this kind in a pretty charged atmosphere around these issues. So I just want to acknowledge that at a human level. Coming to how the decision was handled as opposed to the substance of the decision, you've suggested that there's some misreporting going on about the online meeting, about whether somebody was in a holiday villa, about whether somebody else was, another senior manager was in a hotel room very close to the studio, and rather than coming and seeing people face to face. I don't know how it's been reported, but I can tell you that some of the people directly affected by that experience found it pretty insulting. And I would add to that the experience that we had here in Parliament, where you came in, as you do every year, which we value, to do a briefing with MSPs about the business and its future. And this was just about a week, I think, before the announcement was made. We were already at that point, MSPs were getting rumours that something bad was coming and sought reassurances about your commitment to news and to regional coverage, and got those reassurances. Would it not have been a bit more open, transparent and trustworthy to do that in the other way around, to come in after the announcement had been made and be willing to have those difficult conversations? Can I suggest overall this hasn't been handled well?
So just coming back to your first point around the senior manager, that person, we booked a facility because she had a number of one-to-one conversations with people in her team about the changes, and then there was a brief interruption, and then she spent the rest of the day in Aberdeen with her team. So there is a mischaracterisation going on there, because there were some sensitive conversations that had to happen on a one-to-one basis, and then the person was in Aberdeen. In terms of your second point, we obviously, on an annual basis, have a session in Hollywood to talk about STV. It was quite close to our half-year results, but we're not able to share anything because we have to present our results on a statutory basis twice a year. But I think we made it very clear in that session that news is an incredibly important part of what STV does. But viewing levels are in significant decline, and we have to do all we can to protect regional news. And the plan that we have come up with, that we are discussing with Ofcom, that we are talking about here today, has the objective of protecting regional news. So I think that is absolutely consistent with what we said a couple of weeks ago.
Do you take the point, though, that having those events in the other order, making the announcement first and then being willing to come and talk and answer questions about the real serious impact of this decision, that might have built a little more trust?
We had a long-standing commitment to come to Hollywood. As I said, we couldn't talk about finances in any detail because we had our statutory results coming up, but we made it very clear what the challenges that we have, not only in terms of changing viewing habits, but also the broader macroeconomic position that we're in now. Advertisers are withholding spend. Consumer confidence is at the lowest point that it's been since I can remember, as is business confidence. We are in a very difficult macroeconomic environment. I think we were very clear at that time about the challenges that we have, and the plan that we are talking about here today is about protecting regional news.
Okay, can I go back a little bit then, just before the announcement? You've acknowledged that there are some long-term trends here that are challenging for the industry, but you didn't include these changes in your long-term plans, either when the licence was renewed or when the 5-year strategic plan was produced. So these changes are a short-term response to something that has just happened. They're not part of your longer-term planning. In that short period of time between your 5-year plan, what was that, 5 months ago that was produced, if you've reached a decision that a crisis emerges and you need to make really, really serious, damaging decisions that I'm sure you would prefer not to have to make in that short period of time, what level of dialogue and discussion happened with your workforce about what the options might be? At what level did you sit down with your colleagues and say, we're in a difficult situation here, how can we together explore what the options are, rather than simply landing this on them?
Our long-term plan that we announced in May has two parts to it. It has our growth plan, but we said in May that we have to obviously have the right cost base for us. The markets since May have deteriorated very quickly. We were definitely hoping for an advertising bounce back later this year. There are no signs of that happening.
You're going to get one next year, though, aren't you?
Our visibility is very low. I mean, wouldn't that be great?
With the World Cup, I mean,
the World Cup is 6 weeks of 52 weeks next year. We don't know. We would hope that would generate advertising demand. It might not. The economic situation we're in is very, very difficult at the moment. The visibility.
Can I just remind you of the question?
Sure.
During that period, when you recognise that something has changed, something dramatic has changed, you need to respond to it.
Yeah.
What level of dialogue did you have with your workforce, who you depend upon for everything that you do? What level of dialogue did you have with them about how do we face this challenge? What are the options?
My senior team across the business worked on all of the options available and understand how the business works, how it's all joined up, and we looked at all of our options.
Your senior team looked at the options.
Yes.
I'm asking what level of dialogue you had with your workforce.
The senior team talk to our colleagues all the time, and we're a relatively small business. We're only 500 people. We're a huge brand. We're not a very big business, and my senior team have got very strong connections with their team, as you would expect any senior leader to have. And this piece of work was done as quickly as we could, what we were trying to do was protect as many jobs as possible and also protect our ability to grow for the future.
Okay, final question, Convener, would be about what happens next. From my understanding, you're trying to push Ofcom into making a decision fairly quickly, having a very short consultation window. Can I suggest to you that that is wrong, not only from our point of view as politicians who want to scrutinise this decision, not only from your workers' point of view who will be affected by it, and from viewers' point of view. I think it would be wrong to make this decision quickly from the wider industry's point of view, because if Ofcom was to approve this decision, it would be then very difficult for them to resist other similar changes to reduce or even abolish regionality in other Channel 3 regions. This is a pretty profound change that you're proposing that could impact on the entire industry in terms of independent broadcasting. We need to take our time, and we need to be putting pressure on Ofcom to take their time, don't we?
I'll answer the first part of that, Patrick, and then Bobby maybe in terms of the implications of regional news. Ofcom have suggested to us that a 4-week consultation period is the right timeline for this, and it is a very specific request that we're asking for, but it's up to Ofcom in terms of the length of the consultation. In terms of the implications, Bobby,
I think that the specific request of Ofcom is 2 parts, which is the ability to share formally material between the licences and the removal of the sub-regional ops, which are the 4 current regions that we support, which is very costly in distribution terms in a world where so many people are now online. Those specific points are the Ofcom consideration. I think there's been a lot of attention about the cessation of nightly presentation from Aberdeen, which I understand completely is a concern. That is not subject to Ofcom approval. There are already examples within the Channel 3 network where the news that you see in one place is produced and presented in a different part of the country. Border is a really good example, where the news that is seen in Border comes from Newcastle. And there are already examples in the Channel 3 licence system where the sharing of material is permitted not just between neighbouring licences, which is the case we're asking for in Scotland, but more widely across all of the English regions in some cases, or most of the English regions. We think there's a unique chemistry between the way the licences work in Scotland. And interestingly, the stories we talked about that move from being Dundee stories anchored in Tayside that become national stories immediately go to both of our licences and affect lives all across Scotland. And that's why we need to have the combination of news gathering to unearth and present those stories and bring them to our audiences, but to do it in a way that is affordable and sustainable.
I've seen comments in the industry press with people eyeing this issue very closely and thinking about the consequences for other other Channel 3 regions. There are serious consequences for the wider network of Channel 3 broadcast, not just the immediate regions that will be affected by this and fear the loss of regionality, but there is a real danger that this could spread.
We don't believe that there are, but clearly that is a consideration for Ofcom.
One that's worth taking some time over, I think. Thank you, Convener.
Charlton?
Thank you, Convener, and good morning. I'm not sure if you had a chance to hear before you came in some of the views that were expressed by representatives of the workforce, but I wonder if I could ask you maybe to respond to a couple of things that were raised there with us. So, for instance, you just described your activities just now as protecting regional journalism. The unions have just described to us their view of this as essentially abolishing regional journalism in the north of Scotland in terms of job opportunities, but also in terms of service to the public. So I wonder if you can help us reconcile the 2 positions that have been put to us today.
Regional journalism is not just about broadcast, it's also about accelerating digital. We will have editorial hubs in Aberdeen, we will have editorial hubs in Glasgow as well, and we will continue to have journalism from all parts of Scotland, from Inverness, from Dundee, from Aberdeen, from Edinburgh, from Glasgow, from Holyrood, and from Westminster, and that will continue. And we will, and as this is, we will make the right editorial decisions not only for 6 p.m. but also for digital to make sure that the most most important stories for millions of people in Scotland are reflected every day. At 6 p.m. now, no one is tuning in at 6 p.m. to wonder what has happened that day in Scotland or around the world. People are finding their news digitally first. More and more people are doing that, and and that is why we are seeing a 23% decline in viewing volumes. So regional journalism has to not only create a brilliant show at 6 p.m, but also accelerate digital, because that is increasingly how people are finding their news, and that is how they're finding their regional news.
I don't dispute the fact that there's been a change in viewing habits, but I suppose my next question is, as somebody who lives in and represents an island area, the islands get a look in just now in terms of local stories that are important to us, that appear in the news status quo, if you like. But you mentioned, I think, one of you just now about how stories that become national stories from a local area will still get hearing. My question is, what about local stories that don't become national stories? Stories that have a local significance, and stories which, for places like the islands, would feature in a North of Scotland broadcast. Realistically, where is somewhere like the Western Isles going to feature in the news service that's offered without a North of Scotland news service?
Well, we obviously cover Western Isles topics largely out of our Inverness office, and the South Hebrides are covered from the Central Belt, because the current transmission delineation, which was set up in the 50s, has a kind of swathe cut between the North and South Hebrides, and we cover them from both island areas, from both licence areas. But I think the answer to your question around where that material will come from and how it will be seen, we will still have reporting and news gathering teams who can create material and find stories for distribution. Increasingly, people are finding that material online. And if you look at the Ofcom News Consumption Report, which shows audience expectations of where they will find stories, by the time you move from international and national and what they call county or city-sized units of news, which are all expected to be seen on television, once you get below that level, people do not expect to see that news on television and are increasingly looking for it online, whether it's on Facebook or TikTok or on WhatsApp. And those are the areas...
Unedited sources of news.
Sorry?
Unedited
sources of news. And I think that's the very reason that public service media, including STV, needs to take our values, our Ofcom compliant journalism, which is impartial and fair, into those platforms. And that is why we need a balance of what is distributed on TV and what is increasingly made for online consumption.
Okay, thank you. Can I also ask you to respond in that case to the points that have been discussed with the last panel about the plans that you have for a new radio station? It was certainly put to us that this has nothing to do with news. So has it got anything to do with news at all?
There will be news, but we are not required to have news on this. It's a commercial radio station that, as I said earlier, is about growing our business and increasing our revenues. We are on track to launch early next year. There is a clear gap in the market for a radio station that is unequivocally from Scotland for Scotland. It will have Scottish presenters. It will have a Scottish sensibility and a Scottish focus for it. We are finding increasingly the sort of networkification of commercial radio in Scotland. So we think there is a clear opportunity here, and it is a very important growth initiative for STV. Bobby, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I think only to say that the rise of commercial radio has been immense, that there are nearly 40 million people a week now who listen to a commercial radio station, and listening to commercial radio has continued to increase over the past few years. Radio revenues are very resilient, and it's that very gap that Rufus identified, which is many stations in Scotland remain only as names. They have no programmes at all made from the premises that they used to occupy. We think there's a real clear opportunity for us to make a mainstream commercial music station that is from Scotland for Scotland. As with TV and other public service aspects, news is difficult to monetize. It's difficult to make money out of doing news, but we know that news is important. It's a public service commitment of ours on television, and it's natural for STV News to feature on our radio station. But we're very clear.
Not very much of it.
not very much of it in common and in line with many other commercial radio stations. That's our competition. This is a mainstream commercial radio station which we believe can add to our profitability very shortly.
Can I, one or two briefly? So firstly, others have touched on this, but I understand that this is a rapidly changing environment. But you do appreciate that we all find that it's stretching credulity a bit to believe that you didn't know any of this at the time of the licence a few months ago.
No, we knew that the viewing changes were happening, and I think where we find ourselves now since the licence renewal is that the acceleration of viewing decline and the challenges of the markets that we're operating in. As I said earlier, the macroeconomic situation is very, very difficult, and with the transmission critical report that Ofcom came out, it felt like the time was right to have that conversation with Ofcom, which is what we're doing.
I think one thing I might add to that is it's important to remember that the licensing process is a number of years, and the economic and viewing data used as input to the licenses dates from 2021 and 2022. It's not something that's done in December 24 for a licence that starts in 25. Things have changed significantly from that period, and yes, the public service system is there to ensure that we have public service media and that it's predictable and that we can rely on it. However, the work that Ofcom does every 5 years in looking in the round at public service provision and the challenges and opportunities is also a really important part of that. So you have the licence renewal, which was completed and agreed nearly 3 years ago, and then you have the reality of how viewing and the economic climate has changed since.
And finally, Convener, I wonder if I can give you the opportunity to respond to what was said by the unions, which was that there is somebody, or recently has been somebody in the company who is paid more than the Director General of the BBC. Is that the case?
I don't know what the Director General of the BBC's salary is, and I don't think it's appropriate to talk about executive pay. Executive
it's
pay
relevant if you're pleading poverty. As a company.
Executive pay is a matter for the board. We don't decide our pay, but I don't know what the Director General of the BBC is paid.
Okay, thank you.
So I wonder if I could ask a quick supplementary before moving to the next member. Mr Hayne, you talked about the line of where the licence line was drawn. I suspect from my recollection that there's a strong correlation between that and Storm Amy, and where the danger zone was above that line and where it wasn't below that line. So presumably, this would be an example of where the output from the Aberdeen office was absolutely vital to inform the public in the north about the serious damage done by Storm Amy and the long-term effects of that, which didn't apply in the Central Belt.
Well, I think that's true to a certain extent, but actually what's much more important is the input from our teams in the north to that story for the very reasons you describe. But actually, it's a really good example of how the licences work best together. Storm Amy was a weather system that affected all of us. We were either in the middle of it or we knew people or places that were affected by it. In telling those stories, we needed to hear from the transport infrastructure, we needed to see what was happening in areas that were affected, and that involved everybody from our reporters across the north, Nicola in the area that was strangely in the eye of the storm when she reported, and of course Sean with his detailed weather analysis of what was happening from a meteorological point of view. That is a really good example of how the licences work together to tell the story for all of Scotland.
But I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that much more time would have been spent in the Aberdeen broadcast than in the Central, but in the following days.
I can't think off the top of my head that there would be any difference. I think the main element of the story was what happened last week, and the follow-up has been similar on both programmes from what I've seen.
Okay, I'll move to questions from Mr Kerr.
This is very uncomfortable, appearing before a parliamentary committee to discuss matters pertaining to the internal workings of your business. But, Mr Ratcliffe, you come across very resentful of the fact that we're asking questions at all. I mean, you must appreciate that this is in the public interest. Do you not appreciate the intensity of interest there is among the public as to what you're doing, particularly with your STV North licence?
Of course I do.
So why do you resent being asked questions about it?
Well, I don't resent it. It is absolutely appropriate for you to ask questions, and we will answer them to the best way that we can.
You understand then the public interest demands that we as the representatives, as the elected representatives of the public, ask very direct questions of you as the Chief Executive of STV Group.
Of course.
So, I mean, the bottom line is you've lost the confidence of your shareholders. Your share price has fallen more than 50% in a year. Why?
The share price is a reflection of the challenges of our business and the macroeconomic situation we're in. And what we're trying to do with this plan is put us on a financially sustainable footing moving forward.
You have reasonably performed, consistently performed, except, of course, in the years where there's been major football tournaments when you've done extremely well, which is why I think eyebrows were raised when you said that you weren't sure whether the World Cup next year would generate additional ad revenue. I think you know that the World Cup will generate additional revenue. But in the last 5 years, can you just tell us what the profitability has been in pounds in the actual sums from 2020 onwards, the profitability of STV Group?
I don't have all those numbers in front of me. We made £20.6 million of operating profit last year.
Right. And this year you are responding to a performance that, if I'm not mistaken, suggests that your revenue in the first half has gone down £400,000. Is that right?
Our profit has gone down 37% in the first half of this year.
But your revenue's gone down £400,000.
But our profit has gone down.
Yeah, but so what's the reason for that then? If your revenue is in touch with what you were doing a year ago, year on year, so what is the reason for the profitability?
The most significant dynamic that's happened in the first half of the year is the decline in advertising revenue.
No, that would suggest that revenue will have fallen off a cliff. It hasn't. It's gone down 400,000. So why is there a disproportionate drop in profitability if revenue's only gone down £400,000?
The Studio's revenue in the first half of this year grew, and advertising revenue declined by 10%. And the advertising revenue is profitable, and so that had a bigger impact on the profitability of the group.
I must be honest with you, I'm not sure I understand how those numbers go together, but maybe you can give us more information by writing to the committee. But if your revenue is on par, roughly on par, because 400,000 on the sums we're talking about, 90 million, doesn't seem like a kick off the pants of where it was. But you're describing a huge drop in profitability. And that has led, you're saying, to a complete loss, 50% loss in the share price, suggests a collapse in confidence of shareholders. What are your shareholders telling you about your performance as an executive team?
We obviously have recently spoken to our shareholders as part of our half-year results, and they are shareholders want STV to grow and to succeed and to be financially sustainable. So that is the plan that we're putting in place.
But I understand their aspiration would be that their shareholding would retain its value, if not increase in value. Yeah. But they've just seen their holdings depreciate by 50% in a year. Yeah. Surely they're saying much more than that to you as the executive team. Do they have confidence in you? Are they expressing confidence in you?
The shareholders understand the environment that we're operating in, and they understand the difficulties that STV face. And they understand that the reason why we have to have the cost-saving plan that we announced at the half-year. So our shareholders are supportive of STV. They, like myself and my team at STV, feel that we are confident that we've got a good future in front of us, but we have to do it on a sustainable cost footing.
And so where does the £3 million number come from? What's the basis? What's the basis of the £3 million?
We looked at our cost base, and we looked at all parts of STV and how we could deliver savings to ensure that we can put STV on a financial footing moving forward. I'm not going to break down the £3 million and the different areas that are in it, but all parts of STV are impacted by these changes.
But nothing quite like STV North. Because effectively you're surrendering the licence, aren't you?
There are changes to. There are 60 roles impacted across all of STV, so it isn't. It is a very difficult moment for our colleagues. There are changes to all of STV News.
But you would agree you are surrendering the conditions of the licence that was granted to you effectively a few months ago to operate in STV North.
What we are doing is creating a new programme at 6 p.m. and accelerating our digital news provision to ensure that we are we are protecting regional news for the future.
But that's not what the contract. That's not what the licence conditions are for STV North.
No, I agree. You're
effectively ripping up STV North.
We're not ripping up STV North.
Why aren't you ripping up STV North? You're going to remove local production and presentation to Glasgow.
We are creating. Our proposal is to create a new programme at 6 p.m.
Yes, but that's not. You understand what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah, of course.
There are two licences we're talking about. STV, the STV North one, effectively, is disappearing. You want Ofcom to agree that there will be no longer 15 Channel 3 licences in the UK, but there will be 14, because you're just going to absorb STV North.
No, our ask is to share content across both of our licences. Bobby, I don't know if there's any clarification further from you.
I think that the licences contain a large number of obligations beyond simply hours of regional news. So they are a complex and detailed set of public service commitments, such as independent production, original production, working together as a network, and so on and so forth. Those licences are held across the country and have varying levels of commitments. And as we've said previously, it is our proposal and our model that retains the reporting and the source material for news stories across the bases in STV North. So the licence and the sense of the licence doesn't disappear, and that we include that material on a shared basis, because so much of it is shared.
Bobby Hayne, I hear all of that, but your licence requires 4 hours of regional news weekly and 5-minute sub-regional segments at 6 p.m. And STV North must produce 70% of its regional output within the North licence area. You are ripping all of that up, are you not?
No, I think we're certainly not ripping all of it up. We are asking we're asking to make changes so that we can. For example, the licence doesn't require us to broadcast anything from the north. We could change our broadcasting configuration, move and broadcast the same number of minutes in the Central Belt.
So you don't need Ofcom's permission to shut down broadcasting in Aberdeen?
And I think we've been very clear on that point, which is there are specific points that we do require Ofcom approval for, and there are areas that we don't require Ofcom approval for.
So just spell out, what are the Ofcom approval requirements? Because I thought the licence stipulation is pretty clear about what the regional output within region was supposed to be.
Well, what determines the within-region point is actually Ofcom's made-in-region qualification, which is in their regional definitions. And that already permits licences to broadcast news from outside of the region for which it serves. The question for us is...
Well, regional news.
Yes, the regional news.
But you're taking that away as well.
But the question that we're asking Ofcom for clarification and for transparency here is... It's natural for our 2 licences, and we talked about Storm Amy as a really good example. There are many examples. The other Dundee stories to start with are stories that became national stories that appeared on both services. We want to have transparency and clarity with Ofcom, with our viewers, with members here as to how much of that material we can share. And our suggestion is that we can share all of the material, but that we retain a commitment to make news in both areas, so that you always see news from the north and you always see news from the Central Belt.
That doesn't seem like much of an offer on your part. Basically, you're going to say, news happens in STV North. It will be included in a programme produced out of Glasgow. I mean, that's not much of a negotiation position. We're going to rip up all of the requirements for regional output on STV North, and our compromise is, we'll include some news about the north of Scotland in a programme out of Glasgow. Why are there no management jobs currently in spec for the 60 jobs that you wish to cut in STV?
There are jobs from all levels of the organisation.
So there are management jobs?
There are, from all levels. I can't go through it role by role, but there are all levels of the organisation.
Well, the confidence level of the people that work, the 500 people that work in STV, obviously pretty fragile at the minute. And it is quite a common belief, we understand, among STV employees, that the only people that are going to be within the net of these potential job losses are those that are not the managers. The managers apparently are going to continue in post untouched. Is that not true?
No, that's not true.
All right. Okay. There are many other questions, I think, that need to be asked, not least of all about the fact you're spending money on a radio station, you're hiring very expensive presenters, as well as investing in infrastructure for the studio, after you've just spent £500,000 refurbishing your Aberdeen and Glasgow studios. Aberdeen now is going to fall into disuse. I think you have lots of questions to answer, and time doesn't permit, but I'll pass back to the convener.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mr Kerr. Mr Bibby.
You started earlier, Mr Radcliffe, by saying STV is iconic, and I would absolutely agree with you. I'll go further to say it's a much valued and loved institution in Scotland. And Mr Harvey mentioned about you getting a hard time earlier. I think that's probably because the passion for ensuring that we have good quality journalism in Scotland is one that we all agree. We might not always agree with the coverage from STV, but it's the role that STV play in informing the public of what's going on, not just in the local area but across Scotland, is critically important. And I think that is why we will put you under the scrutiny this morning. That, of course, is only made possible by the people who work at STV and the dedicated journalists and all the other staff that provide that much valued news. You said in opening and a few times since, we're going to provide more stories to more people. How can you provide more stories to more people and at the same time cut 1 in 10 of the workforce at STV, the very people that are providing that much valued and loved service to the people of Scotland?
There are obviously at 6 p.m. we only have 30 minutes in digital. Not only is that there's no ceiling to what you can do in digital, but stories can live there for longer and gain an audience for longer as well. I think what we'll be able to do with this, with our proposal, is have obviously short form stories, but we can also have mid form stories, so longer time lengths with more journalism and the opportunity to explore what we're doing there, and podcasts and explainers, and apply the values of STV News into the digital space. But in order to do that, we have to simplify 6 p.m. and the news that we're doing there, so that we can reflect where viewers are spending their time now. Change is really difficult, and I want to be clear today to everyone here that I as CEO and the leadership team, we completely understand that this is a big change. It's very difficult and it impacts jobs. But not changing with the situation that not only STV but all businesses are finding at the moment is not an option. We have to reflect viewer behaviour, and we have to put STV on a financially sustainable footing. But the digital opportunities here mean that we will be able to apply the brilliant, high-quality journalistic standards of STV News and move it into the digital world at pace.
In terms of that, obviously STV does produce news for the television, which is then put online in a digital space on social media currently. That happens just now. So I still don't see, even if you change what you're doing in news, how you can provide more stories to more people with 10% fewer headcount in your organisation. I don't see how that's possible.
It is because we are taking cost out of our infrastructure, and if we bring gallery and presentation into Glasgow, it allows us to deliver an overall saving for the group, but it also allows us to do more in digital to get more stories out there. As I say, I just don't see how you can do that with a 10% fewer headcount in the organisation. In terms of the STV News currently, you have obviously the STV North programme, but you have excellent news coverage in Glasgow in the west and Edinburgh in the east. You cover issues of importance to people right across Scotland, and that manifests itself in results.
So understand last night, STV News actually got 330,000 viewers last night on the news, which was 50,000 more than Report in Scotland. And the only programme that beat STV News last night was The Celebrity Traitors, which obviously is quite a unique programme. So do you not fear that the dilution of that regional news, the getting rid of that STV News programme will hasten the decline of STV News as a brand? And you, given these figures, given the success story, that you're shooting yourself in the foot by making these changes?
Well, there is a precedent that we have looked at. We used to do a programme in Glasgow and in Edinburgh, in the Central Belt. And when we brought that into one programme, the actual viewing performance increased. I mean, Bobby, you probably got more detail on that than me, because it predates me. But
yeah, I think that the performance that you highlight is in the last few years, and it is since we actually reduced the number of programmes that we transmit. So prior to 2018-2019, STV News was not the most watched news bulletin in the country. And by making the changes that we did then, and I remember a similar level of concern and our teams working through that to deliver fantastic product since in a framework that is much more appropriate for the times. That's where we are again. And the difference today is that television audiences are in decline. And to come back to your stories point on how we generate more stories, there is an inherent inefficiency in making stories for 4 sub-regions that are 5 minutes every day. That takes a lot of effort to do that in a television. It's a very television way of doing things. And you're right to point out that we do use material that's on TV that can go online. But actually the way people are consuming, which is what Rufus said earlier on, they don't wait till 6 o'clock to see what the news is. The vast majority of people have a sense of what's happening during the day and are coming to the 6 o'clock news knowing some or most of the stories as we go through that point. By freeing up the constraints of legacy television distribution, we can do more online. That's how we get to more stories.
I think people would maybe reflect on the increase in view numbers you had over the last few years and perhaps suggest you've got the balance right just now. But can I ask you some specific questions on, firstly on STV Radio, which has come up a few times. I think you mentioned, Mr Radcliffe, earlier that you were looking to make that profitable by 2027.
Yes, that's right.
Obviously, there's a great deal of concern that we're making redundancies on the one hand, whilst investing in STV Radio, hiring people on 6-figure salaries to go in there. In the event of further redundancies in the years ahead, would the radio division be protected from cuts on the basis that it's still in its launch phase and not yet in profit?
I don't think we can hypothesise in that sense, but I think...
Why not?
Well, I think there are 2 things that we need to look at. We need to look at our costs, but we also need to look at our growth areas. And we said earlier that we believe that STV Radio is a very strong proposition for Scottish listeners, but importantly also a very strong proposition for Scottish advertisers. And what we want to do is grow our business moving forward. And if we grow our business moving forward, that also protects our public service obligations that we've talked about today.
But just I understand what you're saying there, but just to what extent are you wedded to STV? Like, if you have to make further redundancies in the coming years before STV Radio is profitable, are you going to protect it and just maintain its budget, or are the redundancies going to fall on other sides of the business?
With the facts laid out in front of us today, obviously the visibility of the economy and the markets we operate in is difficult at the moment, but we are determined to grow our business moving forward, and STV Radio remains a very exciting opportunity for us. We're getting very positive feedback, not just from prospective listeners, but also from advertisers. We've signed our first advertiser for STV Radio, which is Tunnocks, which is also the first advertiser we had in 1957 as well. So it is an opportunity for advertisers to also advertise on STV, and one of the roles that we play as a business is to help Scottish businesses grow by being a strong advertising platform for them as well.
There's obviously concern about how STV is spending some of its money at the same time as making these cuts and the threat of jobs at STV. Talked about STV Radio. Dr Allen earlier asked about the salaries of executive pay, and you said you weren't able to comment whether anyone was paid more than the Director General of the BBC because you didn't know what the salary of the Director General of the BBC was. I've just checked, it's around £545,000. So now
well, I don't think anyone's paid the same level as the Director General, but as I say, I don't set my pay. That's a matter for the board.
Okay, right, okay. I thought I would just provide that information.
Thank you.
You said earlier as well you couldn't share your plans if Ofcom rejected the proposals. Obviously, we're naturally keen to understand what the plan B would be if Ofcom were to reject the proposals. You said you couldn't share that with us. Can I ask you then, and I think the NUJ asked this earlier in the session, what options were considered before taking the decision around the STV North programme?
We've looked at savings in the round across all parts of STV. So the STV News proposals are a part of the overall cost savings plan. There, as Bobby talked about earlier, there are a number of things on STV News that we can do without Ofcom's approval. But if we don't get Ofcom approval for the full proposal, we will have to look at other ways of delivering our savings. But we have approached this cost savings plan with the overall objective of delivering cost savings but protecting as many jobs as possible. And I couldn't be clearer that we realise this is a big change for the organisation and it's difficult. But we have looked at all options to deliver savings, and we believe that the proposal for news not only delivers savings, but it reflects where viewers are going and what they are doing. So we believe that the new STV News programme that will be created as a result of this will be a success for viewers.
There's obviously you're reluctant to share the plans if Ofcom reject it. Not hearing much in the way of what alternatives were considered before making the decisions you've made. We have obviously raised at the very start of this, applying for a licence, then changing, trying to change that licence. We've had investment in Aberdeen Studios, which now not going to be utilised or fully utilised. We've got plans to move into radio as well. We're not hearing what the plans are if Ofcom don't approve the proposals being put forward. It does seem that there's lots of different things changing. That there isn't much of an overall plan here.
I think the strategy that we outlined in May to be Scotland's leading platform for audience and advertisers, that's what we are getting on and delivering, and radio is a part of that, and news is an incredibly important part of that as well. And then in terms of our studios business, not only do we make a lot of programmes in Scotland, so we make Bridge of Lies in Glasgow, we make The Hit List in Glasgow, we've got a new programme for Channel 4 called Game of Wool that we make in Glasgow as well. But we need to become an international content business as well. So we're also making programmes for Netflix, for Apple TV, for Sky. It's really important that we are able to diversify and become we not just making our money from Scotland or from the UK, but become an international business, because if we become a sustainable, profitable business moving forward, coming back to my earlier point, that allows us to deliver our public service obligations. And we are very proud of being a public service broadcaster in Scotland, and we are very proud of STV News, and we are confident that the new programme that we're proposing at 6 p.m. will be a compelling proposition for viewers. We would not be proposing it otherwise.
Thanks.
Thank you. A very quick final question for me before I bring in colleagues. But when you were publishing Fast Forward or developing your plans fast forward to 2030 and developing that. Timescales remind me of how we would develop a manifesto. Can I ask what public, or should I say audience, consultation took place, and did you consult specifically on the development of the radio platform?
Yeah, we did a lot of research on STV Radio, and we've did a lot of analysis on the market and where the market opportunity lay there. And to Bobby's point earlier, commercial radio in Scotland is probably being less impacted by the digital world than TV and video is at the moment. And viewing levels, particularly in commercial radio, are holding up really, really well. And while in the TV space, obviously people are spending time watching Netflix, watching Amazon, watching Apple TV, or increasingly YouTube. In commercial radio, what is happening in the digital space is it is just allowing people to listen to their stations however they want to. So IP delivered audio, digital in cars, smart speakers at home is allowing people to spend more time with their favourite commercial radio stations. But we would have never entered into this venture without doing proper strategic analysis of where the opportunity lay.
So you've talked about strategic analysis and research, but what I really want to know is what audience consultation took place. Was that focus groups? Did you have a call for views?
Well, we've got a very sophisticated audience panel. In fact, it's the biggest research panel in Scotland, called Scott Pulse, and we use that for lots of things actually, and we use that as part of the development of radio. It's a really groundbreaking panel actually, and it's the biggest research panel available in Scotland. And not only do we use it at STV, but we also have some of our advertisers using it as well.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Ms Dunbar and then Mr Stewart.
Thank you, Convener, and can I thank committee for the opportunity to speak this morning, and also thank the first panel for their frank and full evidence. We've heard that nobody tunes in at 6 o'clock, but yet Mr Bibby has just said that 300,000 viewers tuned in last night. I wouldn't call 300,000 folk nobody. I think that's a little bit disrespectful. Anyway, you've spoken about building a national cross-platform STV brand, including radio, and it's based on the trust folk have in STV News. Yet that trust is rooted in regional journalism, particularly in places like Aberdeen. Isn't there a danger that cutting back that presence undermines the very foundation of the wider brand strategy that you're trying to produce?
The biggest challenge for trust is in the digital space, and that is why that we need to accelerate the amount of output that we have in digital, because we all know that there is so much, there is a lack of truth out there, and the high quality credentials of STV News need to apply there. So we believe that the plans that we've outlined will help to deliver that.
But your new commercial radio will be looking for Aberdeen and the North East companies to advertise, when in Aberdeen we've already got one local radio station. We've got another two that still broadcasts to us that is commercial, and we've also got Shmoo, which is a charity radio. So you're going to be competing with them in an oversubscribed platform, I would say. Anyway, STV's logic is that your new way of doing it, where you're going to advertise on radio from first thing in the morning to the new flagships news shows on the TV. But we're not going to have that in Aberdeen. So how do you see the business model working in Aberdeen and the North East particularly?
Bobby, do you want to?
Yeah, I think the point is well made around the existing portfolio of stations that are available. In fact, there are dozens of stations that you can advertise on, because the stations you've identified are local Aberdeen stations. Some of them do their own programming. Some of them are relays of UK content that are syndicated. But you can buy advertising in some or all of them just in Aberdeen if that's what you want to do.
As you can do with your advertising in STV News, because I always see the Aberdeen local companies popping up in the adverts in a programme that nobody watches, which I do.
Well, and just to be clear on the point around news, I don't think we're suggesting that nobody was watching. I think the point we're making is that of the people watching, which is still a significant number, and let's not forget Aberdeen, the STV News at 6 is still Scotland's most watched news programme, of which we're very proud, and it's a fantastic testimony to the team that make it. The point that we're making is very few people watching that programme will have had no knowledge of what today's news is by the time they come in. So that's a
can I just say,
differentiation.
because I'm one of those folk that you grab the bits of news during the day, but then I tune in at 6 o'clock to get the full news, and that's what folk do.
And I appreciate that. I think the combination is important. But coming back to the radio point and the TV point, and we have very strong advertiser connections across the whole north of Scotland, not just Aberdeen, Inverness, further north to the west, and so on and so forth. Those people can advertise all across our schedule. News is 3% of our schedule. So what helps drive those advertiser businesses is advertising in Coronation Street, advertising in Cold Water, the drama, advertising in the World Cup next year, and so on and so forth. So it's really important that they have a spread of advertising. But the real challenge is not how many radio stations there are, because the other opportunity that advertisers increasingly have in Aberdeen, the North East and other places is to go onto Facebook, to go onto TikTok, to go online and advertise their services using their own commercials and not use TV at all. And that's really part of the decline that we see, which is why it's really important for us, and as you outlined in the strategy point, Rufus, having a very clear, targeted digital advertising proposition is also a vital part of our future, so that we can retain business that will just be going to Google and Meta and other operators.
But you just won't be retaining it locally then?
We will be retaining it locally. We absolutely will be. We will be retaining the money, but let's also not forget that although we're changing our news plans, Google and Meta...
I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about keeping the regional aspect of it regional. I'm not sure you are understanding how important STV is in the North East and in the north of Scotland. And, you know, I grew up with it. You know, you were told by your dad to hurry up and eat your supper because the news was away to come on, and you weren't allowed to switch on the telly till you'd eaten your supper. I didn't even know there was other news channels until I was in my late teens, because that's what you did. So we are growing up with it. It is an institution, and it is an institution that is being utilised in the North East and the north. And I think what you're trying to do is going to be doing a huge disservice to the communities that we represent. Sorry, Convener, I'll come back to
the question, but I'll bring in Mr Stewart, and I just remind everybody about times.
Thank you very much, Convener. I too am a son of Grampian TV. I even remember Mr Hayne at North Sound, which were maybe better days. Mr Radcliffe, you said earlier on around about news intake, truth is at risk. And truth is maybe at risk here as well. Because I find it very difficult to believe that when you got that new licence in January of this year, a mere few months ago, that you did not know what was happening out there. And it seems bizarre to me that you are now going to Ofcom to basically renege on that licence, do away with STV North, do away with the legacy that was Grampian TV. Would you like to comment on that?
The licence renewal process takes place over quite a long period of time, as I think Bobby talked about earlier. So
you've gone over that before.
Yeah.
It is incredulous that you went into that licence on the 1st of January, and a matter of months later, you're ripping it all up, as Mr Kerr said, and away to do something completely different.
We're not ripping up the licence. We are looking at a new way of delivering for the two licences with a programme at 6 p.m. that has shared content across both licences. We don't believe that we're trying to rip rip anything up.
Well, I think you are ripping things up. In STV North News, you've got 40% of audience share, which is quite incredible in today's world. And that's because folk tune in to watch Andrea Brymer, Norman MacLeod, Tyrone Smith, Chris Harvey. Folks who may well remain, but in much, much lesser roles. Trusted people. Truth is at risk, you said. We need trusted people. Why do you think it's right to get rid of an operation and people that attain a 40% audience share?
The truth point is around digital. It's not. We are highly regulated on TV, and the STV news that is delivered day after day, night after night, we are all incredibly proud of. The truth point was in the digital space. We operate on 13 platforms, but the content that we're producing in the digital space is surrounded by content that isn't true.
Okay. It's been said to me that STV Radio is a Hain pet project, a diversification which will lead to disaster. Would you like to comment on that, please?
I mean, I'll throw to Bobby, because that was quite a personal comment on Bobby. But the first point, I'll come back to what I said earlier. This was. The STV Radio proposition is a result of thorough strategic analysis of where the opportunity lies, and we are on track to launch it. But Bobby is working with an excellent team on it.
Yeah, I think as Rufus said, and as we've detailed, we've done very clear diligence on the radio market. To be honest, as this idea emerged, because of my radio background, I was sceptical that there is an opportunity until I looked into it very clearly. I am absolutely convinced, having done that diligence, with the work we've done through Scott Pulse, with the analysis we've seen on the radio market, with the shift in listening, and let's not forget what the opportunities that digital brings to radio, because one of the big drivers for us here is DAB radio, which is largely replacing FM, is about to open up to DAB+ and bring many more stations in. And that brings many more opportunities. And you mentioned, Mr. Stewart, those days at Northsound, which are 40-odd years ago. Northsound doesn't make any radio programmes anymore, and that's a great shame. However, it still provides a service which is relayed from elsewhere, and as a result, we are able to step in and make an entire radio station made in Scotland for Scotland on a national basis that we really are confident will be successful.
I think others would disagree with that proposition, but let's move on from that as well. Truth is at risk. Mr. Bibby quoted earlier Tim Davies, the BBC Director General's salary. I understand well the remuneration for your good self, Mr. Radcliffe, is decided by the board. But do you earn more than the 545,000 or so that Tim Davie earns?
No.
Okay. That's now on the record as well, and I'm sure there will be more discussion around about that. In terms of the consultation, you have said that you would prefer a 4-week Ofcom consultation. But over all of this, there is a huge amount of opinion out there. Truth is at risk. Do you think that should be a longer conversation?
The 4-week timeline was a suggestion from Ofcom, and we will wait to see what their ultimate proposal on it is. We have a very specific request, and that is the conversation we've had. But if that situation changes, then that's a question for Ofcom.
Okay. I would ask one final thing. And that is today we have talked a lot about the regional news aspect. And I think it was Mr. Hain talked about sub-regions. Some of the areas that we're talking about do not see themselves as sub-regions. I would ask you to reflect on what you think of the areas that you currently broadcast to. It would be a sad loss to see the Grampian TV legacy go. It would be even sadder if certain places were regarded by yourselves as sub regions. Thank you, Convener.
I don't think that... I do want to very quickly, Mr Hayne. I'm sorry, we're right up against time.
I think in terms of that is the licence terminology. That's not our phraseology. I think, and to just capture that point around the history, I was here when we changed Grampian TV to STV, and there was a concern that there would not be the same appeal. That's not been the case. Things changed, and the news changed and was modernised and retained a very strong appeal to people. The fact that the television configuration of what we're proposing in the future is changing again will not change our commitment to impartial public service news, which will still be on television in a different configuration, but increasingly will be online, where we all agree there's a real need for public service news to be high profile and discoverable.
Mr Hayne, Mr Radcliffe, thank you for your attendance this morning. Uncharacteristically, I'm going to be a bit pushy and say, can you please clear the room as quickly as possible, as we do have another agenda item and we're constrained by general questions starting very shortly. Thank you to everyone.